Medieval streaming services. To all those valiant souls who have ever endured a truly dreadful minstrel's performance, and to those who have suffered through the buffering wheel of doom on their own streaming services, may your days be filled with laughter, and your Courtflix subscriptions remain perpetually uncancelled. This humble tome is dedicated to you, the weary warriors in the endless battle against boredom, the tireless knights of the couch, the steadfast champions of binge-watching. May this tale of medieval streaming bring you a chuckle, a guffaw, perhaps even a hearty roar of amusement, louder than the cheers at a jousting tournament won by a hopelessly inept knight, like, say, Sir Reginald Strongforth, should he ever manage such a feat. For who among us has not yearned for a respite from the drudgery of daily life, be it the endless chores of a peasant's existence or the weighty responsibilities of a crown? The desire for escapism, my friends, transcends time and social standing. From the humble hovel to the royal castle, the yearning for a good story or a thrilling battle reenactment with questionable historical accuracy and excessive slow motion remains a constant in the human experience. Therefore, I dedicate this work, a joyous blend of medieval mayhem and modern media, to the eternal quest for entertainment, that great and noble pursuit which binds us all together, a pursuit so powerful it could even convince a grumpy medieval king to embrace the digital age, though we won't hold our breath on that one. And to the mysterious, hooded figure who mysteriously appeared with the royal scroll, thank you for bringing the gift of streaming to the dark ages, and also for avoiding any significant legal battles about intellectual property rights, though a good lawyer specializing in 15th century contract law might be beneficial in the future. May your cloak remain ever shadowy, and your methods ever slightly suspect, for it is from such unexpected sources that the best entertainment often springs. So please, enjoy the following pages, and may they provide you with the laughter you so richly deserve. To the viewers, listeners, and readers of Courtflix, I salute you. Chapter 1. The Scroll Arrives. The wind howled a mournful dirge outside Sir Reginald Strongforth's chambers, a fitting soundtrack to the night's profound boredom. Another jousting tournament, another ignominious defeat. His lance had, once again, met its match, not a valiant opponent, but a stubbornly unyielding bale of hay. The humiliation still stung, a dull ache beneath the armor's weight. He slumped onto his rough-hewn chair, the chill seeping through the stone floor into his very bones. Even the crackling fire in the hearth couldn't quite banish the damp chill that permeated his castle, a constant reminder of the relentless English weather. The smell of straw and damp earth hung heavy in the air, a familiar aroma that tonight felt particularly oppressive. Reginald sighed, a sound like escaping air from a punctured wineskin. He needed distraction, something, anything, to break the monotonous rhythm of his increasingly pointless existence. Then, a rapping at his door. Not the usual tentative knock of a servant, but a sharp, insistent series of thumps, like a blacksmith hammering out a particularly stubborn piece of iron. Reginald, roused from his melancholic reverie, lumbered to the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the hilt of his sword. He wasn't expecting visitors, especially not at this hour. Peering through the narrow slit in the heavy oak, he saw a figure cloaked and hooded, their face obscured by shadows, leaving only the glint of something metallic, perhaps a sword or a buckle, catching the flickering candlelight. The figure, without a word, deposited a package at his feet and vanished as swiftly as it had appeared, leaving Reginald staring at a beautifully crafted, ornate wooden box. The box was surprisingly heavy and intricately carved with symbols that were both familiar and utterly alien, swirling patterns that resembled both Celtic knots and hieroglyphs, etched with a precision that suggested a master craftsman. It felt strangely warm to the touch, a faint hum vibrating beneath his fingers. Hesitantly, he unlatched the box, revealing a velvet lining, and nestled within a device that looked impossibly out of place in his medieval castle. It resembled a flat, dark slate, but instead of the rough texture of stone, it was sleek and smooth to the touch. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from its surface, a luminescence that pulsed with an almost hypnotic rhythm. A strange collection of symbols, none that he recognized from any known language, was displayed on its screen. He cautiously touched the surface, his fingers feeling a strange, almost imperceptible resistance. He expected nothing, but the device reacted with a soft hum, the symbols shifting and rearranging themselves. What manner of sorcery was this? Initially, Reginald was hesitant. He was a man of action, of steel and brute force. This thing, it felt like an affront to his very being. What business did such a device have in his austere and traditionally medieval world? He knew little of technology, save for the ever-increasing complexity of siege weapons and the occasional surprisingly innovative contraption devised by his less than bright but stubbornly ingenious armorer. This, however, was different. It was enticing. The glowing symbols seemed to beckon, hinting at a world beyond his comprehension. As he gently poked at the surface, more images began to emerge, images of astonishing detail and impossible movement. He discovered, with a sense of growing wonder and a touch of fear, that he was looking at a user interface, icons representing, for instance, a jousting helmet for action, a lute for music, and a skull and crossbones for plague reports were presented to him in a clear, unambiguous manner. These were not the dusty, static tapestries that usually adorned the walls of his chambers, but living, breathing images that responded to his touch, changing and shifting as if animated by some unseen force. It was like a dream, a fantastical vision that played on his very senses. His clumsy attempts to navigate this new interface were often disastrous. He selected violent content by mistake, resulting in a chaotic display of sword fights, fireballs, and what he could only describe as dramatic slow motion, a concept completely alien to the immediacy of real combat. The warriors seemed to fall in slow motion, their movements impossibly graceful, an odd contrast to the messy reality of bloodshed and chaotic clashing of steel that he knew so well. He stumbled upon a seemingly endless array of options, categories so plentiful that they baffled him, yet simultaneously attracted him like a moth to a flickering candle. He'd always been a man of simple pleasures, of ale, more ale, and the occasional brutal joust. This strange, sophisticated contraption seemed to offer something entirely different, a kaleidoscope of untold possibilities. He then stumbled upon a most peculiar category, plague news. Intrigued and perhaps morbidly curious, he selected the icon, a rather grim skull and crossbones rendered in a surprisingly high-resolution detail. The screen flickered, displaying what appeared to be a daily report on the current state of disease in the kingdom. It wasn't the dry, factual pronouncements issued by the royal physician, but rather a presentation of a grim, darkly comedic nature. It began with a jaunty tune, eerily at odds with the subject matter, as a digitally enhanced skull narrated the current plague situation in a macabre yet somehow reassuring tone. The news provided updates on the various plagues afflicting the kingdom, the bubonic plague, of course, but also less common ailments delivered with a similar theatrical flair. He even noticed animated charts depicting rates of disease, presented as a morbid but surprisingly compelling graph, complete with ominous sound effects. It was, in its macabre way, strangely captivating. The dark humor felt both oddly inappropriate and strangely comforting in the face of such dread. Overwhelmed by the sheer volume of content, Reginald decided to seek help. He summoned Thomas, a young peasant boy known for his unexpected aptitude for tinkering with mechanical devices, a skill that was far beyond his humble upbringing. He was also an unlikely aficionado of stories and tales, often improvising them in the village square, entertaining the other peasants with fanciful tales and creative narratives. Thomas, eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension, quickly grasped the basic functionalities of the device, easily navigating its interface, even introducing new features Reginald hadn't even noticed. He was a surprising expert of the mysterious royal scroll, acting as a guide through the strange and wonderful world of streaming entertainment. Thus began Reginald's immersion into the mesmerizing world of Courtflix, a bizarre yet surprisingly captivating blend of ancient tradition and futuristic technology. It was a world where historical inaccuracies were not just tolerated, but celebrated, a place where dramatic slow motion and pyrotechnics were considered essential elements of a good battle reenactment. He initially spent hours engrossed in a dramatized version of the Battle of Hastings, a visual spectacle filled with anachronisms that made him laugh out loud and question the very nature of history itself. Explosions that were clearly out of place, slow-motion sword fights that stretched reality, and knights clad in full plate armor jumping over impossibly high walls. It was all utterly ridiculous, and yet somehow fascinating. And in the depths of his stone chamber, bathed in the soft glow of the royal scroll, he finally forgot his troubles, at least for a few hours. The royal scroll lay before him, a dark obsidian rectangle humming faintly with an inner light. Reginald, despite his initial apprehension, felt a strange pull towards it, a curiosity that overrode his ingrained suspicion of anything remotely resembling sorcery. He traced a finger across the surface, expecting nothing, yet feeling a subtle resistance, a tactile feedback that was both unexpected and oddly pleasing. The symbols, previously static and enigmatic, shifted and rearranged themselves, revealing a grid of icons that were, in their own way, surprisingly intuitive. A large, stylized jousting helmet dominated one corner, its metallic sheen almost tangible. Beneath it, A smaller icon depicting a lute hummed with a soft, almost musical glow. To Reginald's surprise, he recognized these symbols, their meaning immediately clear. The helmet representing action, the lute representing music, a concept he understood intuitively. But nestled between these familiar symbols was a third icon, one far less reassuring. A skull and crossbones, rendered with unsettling realism, its empty sockets seeming to stare directly at him. This, he presumed, was the plague news Thomas had mentioned. His first attempt at navigation was, to put it mildly, disastrous. His thick fingers, accustomed to the feel of sword hilts and reins, were ill-suited for the delicate precision required. He intended to select the lute icon, seeking a peaceful respite from his anxieties, but instead, his clumsy swipe resulted in a cascade of selections, triggering a chaotic display on the screen. The screen erupted into a whirlwind of color and motion. Reginald found himself plunged into a maelstrom of simulated battles, a chaotic ballet of flashing steel and exploding pyrotechnics. Knights, clad in impossibly polished armor, clashed in slow motion, their movements stylized to an absurd degree. It was less a depiction of actual combat and more a fantastical spectacle, a dramatic interpretation that bore little resemblance to the reality of war. Men fell in slow motion, their trajectories marked by exaggerated arcs, their expressions frozen in grimace-like displays of supposed agony. He witnessed explosions that were far too large for any medieval siege weaponry, fireballs that arced through the air with unnatural grace, and knights leaping over insurmountable walls with the improbable agility of trained acrobats. Reginald, initially shocked by the sheer incongruity of it all, found himself strangely captivated. The absurdity of the whole affair began to tickle his sense of humor. This was not the gritty realism of combat, but rather a meticulously crafted, dramatically enhanced representation, and despite its historical inaccuracies, it was mesmerizing. The special effects were, in their own peculiar way, captivating. He couldn't quite grasp the technology, but he understood its essence, the creation of an immersive, albeit fictional, experience. The slow-motion battles were both ludicrous and utterly captivating, creating a viewing experience that somehow managed to both exaggerate and understate the brutal reality of war. He spent an embarrassing amount of time watching this dramatized version of the Battle of Hastings, chuckling at the anachronisms and the sheer audacity of the portrayals. The director clearly had a penchant for dramatic flair and historical inaccuracy. Having exhausted the slow-motion battles, Reginald decided to explore other genres. He cautiously selected the lute icon, expecting a collection of traditional medieval melodies. He was instead greeted with a bewildering array of musical styles, ranging from the expected lute music to strangely familiar yet distinctly modern tunes. He discovered lute-based renditions of pop songs from his own time period, alongside medieval versions of Renaissance music that seemed both familiar and novel. It was a fascinating mix of the old and the new, a peculiar combination of musical traditions that were both strangely complementary and utterly incongruous. He even stumbled upon a section dedicated to musical parodies of historical events, where songs mock the shortcomings of kings, the blunders of generals, and the follies of courtly love. These musical satires painted a humorous portrait of the medieval world, offering a perspective that was both irreverent and insightful. His curiosity piqued, he next turned his attention to the skull and crossbones icon, bracing himself for something grim. The plague news, as Thomas had termed it, proved to be unexpectedly entertaining. The daily update wasn't delivered in the dry, formal tone of the royal physician, but instead was presented as a morbidly comedic sketch. A digitally enhanced skull with glowing eyes narrated the latest disease outbreaks with a surprisingly cheerful demeanor, occasionally cracking dark jokes and making light of the morbid subject matter. The news was presented in the form of animated charts and graphs, detailing the spread of various plagues with a jaunty soundtrack completely at odds with the grim subject matter. Reginald found himself both amused and slightly disturbed by the darkly comedic tone. The reports included detailed breakdowns of various diseases, their symptoms, mortality rates, and even projected spread patterns, all presented with a flair for dramatic presentation that was both unnerving and hilarious. He found himself oddly engrossed, learning far more about disease transmission than he'd ever known from the royal physician's terse bulletins. The morbidly cheerful presentation provided an unexpected sense of comfort in the face of such dire circumstances. Reginald was strangely comforted by the fact that even the most gruesome realities could be packaged as entertainment. As the hours passed, Reginald's initial apprehension gave way to a sense of wonder and amusement. The royal scroll, or Courtflix as Thomas had begun calling it, was a revelation. A window into a world of endless entertainment, a world where historical accuracy was sacrificed for dramatic effect, where tragedy could be spun into comedy, and where even the grim realities of medieval life could be rendered into a strangely compelling form of entertainment. He finally understood the allure of this strange device. It was more than just entertainment. It was an escape, a distraction from the mundane realities of his life as a knight, a way to find amusement in a world that was often dreary and bleak. The Courtflix offered an infinite stream of distraction, an unparalleled form of escapism that completely transcended the limited entertainment options available to him in his medieval castle. The skull and crossbones icon pulsed gently, a morbid heartbeat on the obsidian surface of the royal scroll. Reginald, emboldened by his earlier foray into the world of slow-motion battles and lute-based pop music, tapped the icon with a newfound confidence. The screen flickered, then settled on a surprisingly cheerful animation, a digitally enhanced skull with glowing, mischievous eyes, bobbing slightly to an upbeat jig. "Greetings, pestilence-prone patrons," the skull chirped, its voice a surprisingly high-pitched tenor. "Welcome to your daily dose of plague news, where death is just a laugh away." Reginald suppressed a chuckle. The juxtaposition of the grim subject matter and the relentlessly cheerful presentation was oddly captivating. The skull proceeded to deliver a detailed, yet strangely upbeat report on the current plague situation. Charts and graphs, rendered in vibrant colors, illustrated the spread of various diseases across the kingdom. The animation was surprisingly sophisticated, with tiny animated plague rats scurrying across maps, leaving trails of infection in their wake. A jaunty medieval-sounding tune played in the background, completely at odds with the dire nature of the information being presented. The bubonic bonanza continues its triumphant march through the Midlands, the skull announced, its glowing eyes twinkling. Mortality rates remain encouragingly high. We're talking near Shakespearean levels of dramatic demise, folks. And in other news, the shivering sickness has inexplicably taken a liking to the royal falconry. Poor Bartholomew III, may he fly amongst the stars and not infect them. Reginald learned more about the intricacies of disease transmission in those few minutes than he had in years of listening to the royal physician's dry pronouncements. The reports weren't just about numbers and statistics. They were infused with a darkly comedic sensibility that made even the most gruesome realities palatable. The skull's irreverent commentary in the animated charts turned the sobering facts into a weirdly compelling form of entertainment. He even learned about a new plague brewing in the north, nicknamed the Itchy Itch, which the skull described as a wonderfully contagious skin condition that guarantees weeks of delightful discomfort. News of the Plague News program naturally spread like, well, a plague. Word of Reginald's newfound entertainment reached the nearby village of Little Snottington with the speed of a well-aimed catapult stone. By midday, a sizable crowd had gathered outside the castle walls, their faces a mixture of morbid curiosity and outright terror. They weren't there to besiege the castle or demand alms. They were there for the daily plague update. Agnes Periwinkle, a woman whose face was a roadmap of wrinkles etched by years of hardship and exposure to various pestilences, adjusted her shawl, her eyes fixed on the castle windows. "Will it be the sweats this time?" she muttered to her neighbor, a grizzled old man named Cuthbert, who was clutching a wooden rosary with alarming fervor. Or perhaps the dreaded Black Death's cousin, the slightly less deadly but still inconvenient Black Itch. Cuthbert, his breath rattling in his chest like dried leaves in a winter wind, shook his head. "Pray for the Itchy Itch, Agnes. At least with that one, you're guaranteed a good scratch." His pessimism was, in its own macabre way, reassuring. It was a kind of gallows humor, a desperate attempt to find levity in the face of unrelenting grimness. The crowd was a peculiar mix of villagers, a farmer clutching his pitchfork, a blacksmith leaning heavily on his hammer, a seamstress nervously adjusting her needles. Their faces were etched with the weariness that comes from a life lived on the precipice of death. Yet a flicker of excitement sparked in their eyes as they anticipated the plague news. As Reginald's royal scroll flickered to life, showcasing the cheerfully morbid skull, a collective gasp, then a ripple of nervous laughter ran through the assembled crowd. Some crossed themselves, some whispered prayers, others simply stared, captivated by the bizarre spectacle. The skull's pronouncements were met with a range of reactions. A sudden mention of a new outbreak in the nearby hamlet of Crumblington was met with a collective moan of despair. Then, when the skull cheerfully announced that the dancing plague was finally receding, a wave of relief washed over the crowd. They exchanged glances, relieved, but still slightly unsettled by the morbid humor. A particularly gruesome detail, the skull's description of a particularly unfortunate case of spontaneous combustion caused by an unusually virulent strain of the flaming fever, caused a mixture of shock, horror, and strangely uproarious laughter. One woman fainted, another burst into unrestrained giggles. The darkly comedic presentation of death and disease seemed to oddly unite this collection of terrified villagers. Their shared experience, their shared vulnerability in the face of mortality, was reflected in their simultaneous reactions to the plague news. The humor, however morbid, created a strange sense of camaraderie, a shared understanding that even in the face of overwhelming bleakness, laughter remained a powerful, if darkly ironic, coping mechanism. After the broadcast concluded, a strange quiet fell upon the crowd. They dispersed slowly, the image of the cheerfully macabre skull still lingering in their minds. Some spoke in hushed tones about the latest outbreaks. Others shared grim jokes born of desperation and dark humor. But there was a sense of shared experience, of having faced a horrifying reality together, comforted by the oddly reassuring absurdity of it all. The royal scroll had managed to bring them together, not just in fear, but also in a strange, shared laughter that somehow eased the unbearable weight of their precarious existence. For in Little Snoddington, as in many other villages across the kingdom, plague news had become not just a report of calamity, but a shared ritual, a darkly comedic moment of connection in a world steeped in fear and uncertainty. The absurdity they realized was a necessary balm to the grim reality of their lives, and as they walked away, under the bleak light of the setting sun, they couldn't help but feel a sense of perverse gratitude for the cheerfully morbid updates from the royal scroll. After all, what else was there to do but laugh at death itself, especially when it was presented with such unsettlingly good production values? Reginald stared at the royal scroll, its obsidian surface reflecting the flickering candlelight. The sheer volume of content was staggering. Rows upon rows of icons, each promising a different form of entertainment, stretched across the screen like an endless digital tapestry. He felt a profound sense of overwhelm, a feeling not dissimilar to facing a charging warthog, only instead of tusks and snorting aggression, he was confronted by thumbnails of jousting tournaments, lute concerts, and a disturbing number of cooking shows featuring suspiciously gelatinous meats. He'd mastered the basics, navigating the menu, selecting content, even adjusting the volume, a feature he initially mistook for a magical amplification spell. But the sheer number of choices was paralyzing. He needed help, a guide, a Sherpa, to navigate this digital Everest of entertainment. And that's how he found himself knocking on the door of Thomas, a young peasant boy known throughout the village for his uncanny ability to fix broken clocks and even whisper it, reprogram the village mill's water wheel using repurposed parts from a discarded catapult. Thomas, it turned out, was the village's resident tech whiz, a fact that was kept largely secret to avoid accusations of witchcraft. Thomas's cottage was surprisingly more technologically advanced than Reginald's castle chamber. While Reginald's quarters boasted tapestries depicting heroic, if slightly inaccurate, battles, Thomas's humble abode contained a surprisingly extensive collection of salvaged mechanical parts, cleverly arranged and repurposed into a functional, if somewhat chaotic, workshop. Gear wheels whirred, wires sparked, and the air hummed with the low thrum of technological innovation. Reginald had half expected to find him tinkering with a miniature siege engine. Instead, He found the boy engrossed in meticulously cleaning a collection of oddly shaped stones, each bearing intricate, almost circuit-like etchings. "Thomas, my boy," Reginald boomed, his voice echoing in the surprisingly spacious cottage. "I require your expertise." He gestured vaguely at the royal scroll, which he'd brought along, nestled carefully in a velvet pouch, usually reserved for his most prized warhammer. Thomas looked up, his eyes shining with a mixture of curiosity and cautious apprehension. He was a slender lad, with a shock of unruly brown hair and hands perpetually smudged with grease, but his gaze held an intelligence that belied his humble origins. "The royal scroll, Sir Reginald?" Thomas said, his voice surprisingly calm, considering the presence of a knight in his workshop. "What troubles you, sir?" Reginald explained his predicament, his voice imbued with a mixture of frustration and awe. He detailed the sheer number of options, the bewildering array of genres, the endless scrolling that felt like traversing a never-ending desert of digital content. Thomas listened patiently, nodding occasionally, a wry smile playing on his lips. Once Reginald had finished his lament, Thomas took the royal scroll, his fingers tracing the obsidian surface with a familiarity that surprised Reginald. "Sir Knight," Thomas said, his voice barely a whisper, "you are approaching this device with the tactical acumen of a badger facing a blacksmith's forge. Let me illuminate you." And so began Thomas's tutelage. He patiently guided Reginald through the intricacies of the Royal Scroll's interface. He explained the search function, a revelation to Reginald, who had previously been relying on sheer luck and painstakingly scrolling through every single category. He demonstrated the rating system, explaining how to filter results based on user reviews, although, Thomas added with a wink, a lot of them are from people claiming to have witnessed miraculous cures from the dancing plague, which is purely anecdotal, of course. Thomas also revealed the Royal Scroll's recommendation engine, a feature that Reginald found particularly fascinating. It suggested various programs based on his viewing history. Apparently, Thomas explained, after your viewing of The Siege of Carcassonne, Director's Cut, and Medieval Lutes for Modern Ears, it seems the algorithm thinks you might enjoy The Art of Medieval Cheesemaking, a documentary. It also suggests a romantic comedy called The Knight Who Couldn't Quite. But I'd advise against that one, Sir Knight. It's unconventional. Reginald, initially skeptical, quickly became a convert. With Thomas's guidance, he navigated the vast library of content with newfound ease. He discovered Hidden Gems, a captivating documentary on the surprisingly complex social structures of medieval fleas, a surprisingly gripping historical drama about a court jester who accidentally sparked a revolution. Spoiler, it involved a strategically placed pie, and even a reality TV show called The Great Tournament Bake-Off, where contestants competed to create the most impressive medieval pastry. He watched a gripping documentary detailing the social dynamics of medieval squirrels. Thomas even taught Reginald how to utilize the Royal Scroll's advanced features, such as personalized playlists. He created one titled Epic Battles and Slightly Less Epic Cooking Shows, and even the advanced search filters, which allowed Reginald to narrow down his viewing options to specific historical periods, genres, and levels of simulated violence. Their sessions became a regular occurrence. The Dusty Knight's chamber Previously a sanctuary of quiet contemplation and battlefield strategy, transformed into a surprisingly modern entertainment hub, with Thomas constantly updating the Royal Scrolls software and Reginald offering increasingly insightful critiques on the accuracy of historical portrayals. Reginald, no longer overwhelmed, discovered a new appreciation for the power of streaming entertainment. And Thomas, the village tech whiz, found a patron who, despite his initial technological ineptitude, possessed an unexpectedly sharp, critical eye. Their unlikely partnership, a testament to the bridging of eras and the enduring human quest for entertainment, would become the stuff of legend, or at least a very popular episode of Plague News. The Royal Scroll hummed softly, a low thrum that vibrated through Reginald's surprisingly ornate chamber. It wasn't the hum of magic, not exactly. Thomas had explained it was something called power consumption, a necessary evil in the pursuit of digital entertainment. Reginald, still finding the whole concept faintly unsettling, had simply nodded sagely, a learned expression masking his complete lack of comprehension. He'd traded his usual contemplation of battlefield strategy for the far more baffling terrain of Courtflix. He had, after much deliberation and several close calls with accidentally ordering a year's supply of medieval mystery meat, settled on a dramatized version of the Battle of Hastings. The thumbnail had promised epic battles, stunning visuals, and a whole new perspective on Norman conquest. Reginald, having been a rather peripheral participant in that particular historical event, mostly relegated to the sidelines due to a severe bout of dysentery, was intrigued. The screen flickered to life, revealing a surprisingly vibrant depiction of the 1066 conflict. The first thing that struck Reginald wasn't the meticulously recreated battlefield, nor the surprisingly accurate portrayal of Norman weaponry. It was the explosion, a massive, fiery explosion that obliterated Harold Godwinson's forces before the battle had even properly begun. Reginald blinked. He hadn't recalled such a dramatic pyrotechnic display during the actual event. Then came the slow motion. Arrows individually highlighted soared through the air, accompanied by dramatic musical swells, before embedding themselves with a satisfying thwack into the unfortunate Saxons. Each Norman warrior seemed to move with the balletic grace of a swan, their swords flashing with an unnatural luminescence that was certainly absent from the rather muddy reality of the original affair. "Good heavens," Reginald muttered, leaning forward, his velvet robe rustling. He'd expected a certain degree of artistic license, of course. Historians, after all, were known for their interpretative flair, but this was excessive. This was akin to depicting a peasant revolt as a synchronized swimming competition. The narrative itself was equally imaginative. William the Conqueror was portrayed as a brooding, charismatic action hero, complete with a voiceover that was eerily similar to that of a traveling minstrel Reginald had once heard perform an incredibly inaccurate ballad about a dragon-slaying knight. Harold, meanwhile, was reduced to a sniveling, incompetent fool whose strategic decisions were less inspired and more akin to a drunken badger selecting a mating partner. As the battle raged on, Reginald found himself making increasingly frequent annotations on the margin of his copy of the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle. He scribbled comments like, "highly improbable formation," No such siege weapons existed, and my dysentery was far less visually appealing. He even added a detailed critique of the accuracy of the Norman helmet designs, a testament to his encyclopedic knowledge of medieval headgear. He watched, captivated despite his constant corrections. The sheer audacity of the historical inaccuracies was strangely mesmerizing. It was like a warped mirror reflecting a familiar event, distorting it into something fantastical and absurd. There was a chaotic beauty in the complete disregard for historical accuracy, a kind of cinematic anarchy that was both hilarious and profoundly unsettling. The scene where William's horse, seemingly fueled by a potent blend of oats and adrenaline, launched itself into a series of gravity-defying leaps, leaving a trail of miniature explosions in its wake, caused Reginald to nearly choke on his goblet of wine. He'd seen plenty of horses in his time, sturdy, dependable steeds, certainly not acrobatic marvels capable of defying Newtonian physics. And then there was the ending. Instead of the messy, brutal reality of the battlefield, Courtflix presented a dramatically choreographed showdown between William and Harold, complete with a slow-motion sword clash that ended with William, bathed in golden light, triumphantly raising his sword above a now suspiciously pristine field of battle. There was a final dramatic zoom-in shot on a single perfectly preserved Norman flag, complete with an inspirational musical sting. It was also tidy. Reginald leaned back, exhausted but strangely satisfied. He switched off the royal scroll, the sudden silence amplified in the otherwise quiet chamber. He contemplated the implications of this historically inaccurate, yet oddly captivating cinematic extravaganza. Perhaps, he mused, history itself wasn't just a series of events, but a canvas upon which the human imagination could freely paint, even if the brushstrokes occasionally clashed with the factual backdrop. Or maybe it was simply a testament to the human desire for entertainment, a desire that could happily ignore inconvenient facts in the pursuit of a good story. He decided to order some medieval mystery meat. The Plague News report had been particularly glowing about this batch, citing a surprisingly high level of flavor intensity. He cautiously selected the option with the least amount of suspicious, just gelatinous qualities, and added it to his digital shopping cart. He thought about the documentary on medieval squirrels he'd watched earlier. They'd had surprising insight into the dynamics of nut gathering. Fascinating stuff. He was beginning to suspect the royal scroll was both a curse and a blessing. A very, very entertaining curse. Perhaps tomorrow he'd look into that documentary on the social lives of medieval fleas. For research purposes, of course, purely for research. The next day, after a surprisingly invigorating breakfast of medieval mystery meat, it had, disappointingly, lacked any significant gelatinous qualities. Reginald decided to tackle something a little less explosive. He selected a documentary about the evolution of the trebuchet. He felt a brief pang of guilt at not watching the recommended romantic comedy, The Knight Who Couldn't Quite, but he decided to prioritize intellectual stimulation over potential embarrassment. He was, after all, a knight of discerning taste, a connoisseur of both historical accuracy and wonderfully absurd medieval entertainment, and he had a feeling his journey through the digital annals of Courtflix was only just beginning. The sheer volume of content was quite frankly staggering and utterly, hilariously inaccurate. Chapter 2. The Scroll's Impact. The village of Oakhaven had, until recently, possessed a cultural landscape as monotonous as its name suggested. Entertainment was a sporadic affair, dictated by the whims of itinerant minstrels and the grim regularity of public hangings. The latter, while undeniably dramatic, lacked the replay value of a good ballad, and the former often suffered from repetitive lyrics and a disconcerting tendency for the lute player to be alarmingly out of tune. Life in Oakhaven was a predictable cycle of toil and tedium, punctuated by the occasional bout of dysentery and the ever-present threat of spontaneous combustion in the village blacksmith's shop. All that changed with the arrival of the royal scroll. Initially, the device had been greeted with a mixture of bewilderment and suspicion. Old man Fitzwilliam, a man whose beard rivaled the length of a particularly ambitious tapestry, had declared it the work of the devil, a claim that was only partially refuted by the village priest, Father Bartholomew, who confessed he couldn't quite make head nor tail of it. However, the persistent hum emanating from the device, coupled with the flickering light emanating from its polished oak casing, proved far too intriguing for the villagers to ignore. Thomas, the scroll's somewhat reluctant installer and purveyor of surprisingly high-quality medieval mystery meat, as Reginald had discovered, quickly became the village's newest celebrity. His explanations of pixels, streaming, and high definition were met with a mixture of awe and incredulity. But the sheer visual spectacle of Courtflix projections on a hastily constructed screen in the village square proved far more persuasive than any verbal description. Before the advent of the royal scroll, the village square was a rather desolate place, its cobblestones worn smooth by the relentless rhythm of peasant feet and the occasional stray chicken. Now it was transformed into an outdoor cinema, a vibrant hub of activity. A large, white sheet, strung between two sturdy oak trees, served as the screen, its surface illuminated by the flickering glow of the projected images. Rushes and hay bales provided seating, a remarkably comfortable arrangement that even Fitzwilliam had grudgingly admitted was preferable to sitting on the cold, hard ground. The atmosphere was palpably different. Instead of the usual hushed anticipation of a hanging or the muted murmur of weary villagers returning from the fields, the square buzzed with a shared excitement. Children shrieked with laughter at slapstick comedies involving unusually acrobatic pigs and knights with a surprising aptitude for juggling flaming torches. Older villagers, their faces illuminated by the flickering light, chuckled at witty banter between characters who appeared to speak with the same thick accents that characterized Oakhaven itself. Even Fitzwilliam, despite his initial reservations, could be seen occasionally cracking a smile, although he maintained a staunchly skeptical expression. The choice of programming was as diverse as the village population itself. One moment, the screen might display a dramatic reenactment of the 100 Years' War, featuring knights who fought with an improbable level of choreographed grace and a suspiciously accurate portrayal of the English longbow's trajectory. The next, it might showcase a documentary on the surprisingly complex social lives of medieval fleas, or a romantic comedy about a knight who couldn't quite conquer his fear of heights, a common affliction, it turned out, even in the 14th century. Plague news A daily update on the latest outbreaks became a surprisingly popular program, drawing even more viewers than the cooking show Medieval Meals, which focused on innovative uses of turnips. The show's host, a perpetually cheery woman who inexplicably wore sunglasses even during the darkest evenings, offered grimly comedic commentary on the latest bubonic plague cluster or smallpox outbreak, punctuating her bulletins with unsettlingly cheerful pronouncements like, "And that's your plague update for today. Stay tuned for recipes that will knock your socks off, assuming you still have socks." The Royal Scroll's impact extended beyond mere entertainment. It fostered a sense of community, bringing the villagers together in a shared experience. The discussions that followed each broadcast were far more lively and engaging than the usual arguments about the quality of the harvest or the best way to skin a rabbit. People shared opinions about the historical accuracy of the battles, a particularly controversial topic, debated the merits of various medieval recipes, and even organized small-scale tournaments to recreate some of the more impressive feats of strength displayed on the screen. Even the village's traditional entertainment wasn't completely overshadowed. The traveling minstrels, previously relegated to the sidelines, found a new audience, as their songs formed the basis of numerous Courtflix sing-alongs. The public hangings, while still taking place, were now preceded by a brief showing of Medieval Justice, a documentary series, which proved surprisingly insightful, at least from a moral perspective. The transformation was complete. Oakhaven, once a village of quiet desperation, was now a village of shared laughter and surprising sophistication. The Royal Scroll, far from being the work of the devil, had become a source of unexpected joy, uniting the villagers in a common pursuit of entertainment, even if that entertainment was sometimes historically inaccurate, occasionally disturbing, and almost always unexpectedly hilarious. The success of Courtflix in Oakhaven wasn't a singular phenomenon. News of its popularity spread far and wide, leading to increased demand for the Royal Scroll in neighboring villages and in even some of the larger towns. Thomas, the unexpected pioneer of medieval streaming, found himself inundated with requests for installations, his previously quiet existence now a whirlwind of travel, technical troubleshooting, and the constant pressure to keep up with demand for medieval mystery meat, a product whose popularity was directly correlated to the number of plague news reports featuring alarmingly high flavor intensity. But the story of the village entertainment revolution wasn't just about technological advancement. It was a testament to the human spirit's ability to find joy and connection in even the most unexpected circumstances. In the village square, under the flickering light of the projected images, the villagers of Oakhaven discovered a shared language, a common bond forged not in the fires of adversity, but in the shared laughter of a surprisingly anachronistic form of entertainment. And as they watched a surprisingly accurate depiction of a medieval squirrel's mating ritual, they understood that the true revolution wasn't just about changing how they consumed entertainment. It was about changing how they experienced life itself. And surprisingly, the turnips in medieval meals were actually quite delicious. Even Fitzwilliam had admitted to enjoying the unusually creative use of root vegetables, despite still maintaining his outward skepticism about the technological magic behind it all. The revolution, it seemed, was far from over. Word of the royal scroll's miraculous ability to conjure forth moving pictures, and more importantly, plague updates with surprisingly upbeat music, had naturally reached the ears of King Theodore III, a ruler known less for his wisdom and more for his fondness for extravagant feasts and surprisingly accurate depictions of himself in tapestries. The artist clearly possessed an uncanny knack for flattering angles and strategically placed fabrics. The king, a man whose daily schedule involved an inordinate amount of time spent inspecting his fingernails for imperfections, declared that he, and only he, would be the first monarch to witness this technological marvel, a decision that sent a ripple of anxiety through his court. Anxiety, it should be said, wasn't usually associated with royal pronouncements regarding new entertainment options, but this was different. This was the royal scroll. Reginald, still smelling faintly of medieval mystery meat, a scent that surprisingly the king's pet pug seemed to find rather appealing, found himself summoned to the royal palace, a location that offered a stark contrast to the rustic charm of Oakhaven. Gone were the charmingly crooked cobblestone streets and the comforting aroma of wood smoke. Instead, Reginald was enveloped by a dizzying array of polished marble, intricately carved furniture, and tapestries depicting the king's ancestors engaged in various heroic and highly dubious feats. The air, thick with the scent of expensive perfumes and something faintly reminiscent of overcooked pheasant, was far removed from the earthy fragrances of Oakhaven. Servants, dressed in silks and velvets that would have fed Oakhaven for a month, scurried silently, their movements as precise and predictable as the changing of the tides. The king's throne room was a spectacle in itself. The throne, a monstrosity of gold leaf and inlaid jewels, could have easily doubled as a small-scale mountain. Theodore III himself was a study in regal extravagance, clad in robes woven from threads of pure gold, or at least that's what Reginald assumed. He wasn't an expert in textiles, his expertise lying firmly in the realm of medieval mystery meat and surprisingly resilient oak casings. He sat upon his throne, his expression a fascinating blend of regal boredom and simmering curiosity. His advisors, a collection of men whose expressions suggested a profound weariness born from years of catering to the whims of a rather demanding monarch, stood rigidly behind him, their faces impassive masks of courtly etiquette. Reginald, clutching the royal scroll like a life raft in a storm, attempted a bow. It wasn't particularly graceful. Years spent navigating the uneven cobblestones of Oakhaven hadn't exactly honed his skills in courtly deportment. The king, however, seemed unfazed. He merely waved a languid hand, a gesture that sent several nervous courtiers scrambling to retrieve a velvet cushion for Reginald's perpetually aching knees. So, the king boomed, his voice echoing through the cavernous hall, this royal scroll, is it truly capable of conjuring forth moving pictures? He paused, then added, with a suspicious glint in his eye, and is it some kind of infernal device designed by sorcerers to usurp my rightful place upon the throne? Reginald, ever the pragmatist, chose to ignore the last part. Your Majesty, he began, unfurling the oak casing of the scroll. He had learned that excessive technical jargon was far less impressive in the context of a highly polished royal court. His previous explanations to the villagers had included diagrams and technical specs, not required here. It is a window to other worlds, a gateway to entertainment. He expertly navigated the menu, displaying various options, choosing medieval meals first, a decision driven by the hope of offering something palatable to the court. The screen flickered to life, displaying the cheerfully morbid presenter and her turnip-based culinary creations. A collective gasp rippled through the court. The king, however, showed no immediate signs of either awe or terror, merely raising an eyebrow. "Turnips," he mused, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "I confess, I've never considered them culinary masterpiece." Reginald, sweating slightly, switched to plague news. The enthusiastic host greeted them with alarming cheer, discussing the latest bubonic plague outbreak with the same energy one might reserve for reporting on a particularly successful harvest. A few courtiers fainted. Others looked distinctly nauseous. The king, however, remained unmoved. "Intriguing," he conceded. "Rather graphic, but not nearly as graphic as the tapestry depicting my great-uncle Bartholomew's unfortunate incident with the royal goose." He then insisted on seeing the 100 Years' War episode, finding the historically inaccurate choreography amusing, pointing out one particularly egregious moment where a French knight seemed to have sprouted wings mid-battle. His laughter was surprisingly infectious, spreading through the court like a particularly cheerful plague. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the opulent throne room, King Theodore finally announced his verdict. "It is tolerable," he declared, wiping a stray bit of pheasant from his sleeve. "Not as impressive as my personal collection of jeweled snuff boxes, but certainly a welcome diversion from the usual courtly intrigues. Although," he added, a mischievous glint in his eye, "I do believe we could use some better special effects. Perhaps we could add dragons." The court, exhausted but slightly amused, breathed a collective sigh of relief. The royal scroll, it seemed, had survived its royal review. Reginald, meanwhile, breathed a sigh of relief more profound than anything the court experienced, and made a mental note to ensure a large delivery of medieval mystery meat to the palace. He had a feeling it would be appreciated far more than the court's usual pheasant-heavy diet. The king's demand for better special effects, however, posed a new challenge, and Reginald knew, with a mixture of dread and excitement, that his journey into the world of medieval streaming was far from over. The revolution, it seemed, was indeed ongoing, and it was starting to smell suspiciously like turnips. The king's pronouncement echoed through the great hall, a decree that reverberated not only through the marble floors, but also through the very fabric of the kingdom. "Courtflix," he declared, the word rolling off his tongue with a surprising amount of enthusiasm, "shall be available to all. Every loyal subject, from the humblest peasant to the most ostentatious nobleman, shall have access to the royal scroll." A collective gasp, this time significantly less faintish than the one provoked by the plague news segment, swept through the court. The advisors, who had spent years carefully navigating the treacherous waters of royal whims, exchanged glance of dawning horror. Logistically, this was a nightmare. Getting the royal scroll into every hamlet, every village, every remote, mud-caked corner of the kingdom. It was akin to herding a particularly stubborn flock of particularly aggressive royal geese. Reginald, however, felt a twinge of excitement. The sheer scale of the undertaking was staggering, a challenge that would put his oak casing expertise to the ultimate test. He imagined a logistical army, a medieval version of Amazon's delivery service, only instead of drones and trucks, they would have pack mules and perhaps a few heavily laden ox carts, battling treacherous mountain passes and muddy roads. He envisioned himself as the supreme overseer, issuing cryptic orders scribbled on scraps of parchment, directing an army of bewildered messengers and sweating scribes. The initial hurdle, as Reginald quickly discovered, was not the technology itself, but the sheer volume of requests. The royal blacksmith, already groaning under the weight of the king's insatiable demand for golden snuff boxes, was tasked with creating thousands of oak casings, a feat that would have taxed the skills of even the most talented craftsmen. The royal carpenters, meanwhile, were ordered to build custom stands for the scrolls, sturdy enough to withstand the rigors of travel, yet elegant enough to appease the king's refined sensibilities. They whined about the lack of suitable timber, complaining about the increasing number of naughty assignments. Reginald suspected they were making cryptic references to royal politics. The messengers, a ragtag bunch of runners who looked more like they belonged in a tavern than a royal courier service, were subjected to rigorous training, which included sessions on how to avoid getting lost, how to survive encounters with bandits, and most importantly, how to deal with irate villagers who demanded their Courtflix scrolls forthwith. Their training was rigorous, mostly consisting of running up and down hills with progressively heavier sacks and listening to lectures on the importance of not losing the scrolls they were responsible for transporting. One particularly enthusiastic messenger, keen on efficiency, attempted to harness a flock of geese to his cart. Unfortunately, the geese were of a highly territorial nature and led to a minor but highly entertaining incident involving a royal goose and a very confused messenger. The distribution itself proved even more chaotic. The initial deliveries were met with a mixture of awe, confusion, and suspicion. Some villagers viewed the scroll with religious reverence, believing it to be a divine gift. Others, less spiritually inclined, saw it as a cunning device created by royal sorcerers to spy on them. Reginald received reports of one particularly ingenious farmer who attempted to use the scroll as a plow, while another used it as a roof tile for his ramshackle cottage. Several knights complained of their inability to operate the device while wearing full plate armor. The problems extended far beyond simple misunderstandings. One particularly unfortunate messenger, mistaking the Plague News Channel for an informative documentary on the cultivation of turnips, showed it to an entire village, causing a mass panic that would have rivaled the actual plague's intensity. The village elder, a stout woman named Agnes, was not amused. "There's a pandemic on, and they're showing cooking tutorials?" she lamented, causing a stampede that resulted in a highly unwanted expansion of the village's existing mud-caked infrastructure. The 100 Years' War documentary, meanwhile, ignited a series of impromptu reenactments across the kingdom, sometimes ending in unexpected battles between neighboring villages who misinterpreted some particularly exciting parts of the historical battles, which, it must be noted, often ended in disputes over the location of the nearest tavern, as reenactments tend to lead to quite excessive drinking. King Theodore, surprisingly, remained unfazed by the mounting chaos. He viewed the logistical nightmares as mere minor inconveniences, minor setbacks in the grand scheme of his ambitious project. He even found the reports of the accidental reenactments amusing, commenting that it's good to see the common folk exercising, even if the exercise involves blunt instruments and excessive consumption of ale. Furthermore, he expressed a keen interest in the potential for Courtflix to showcase royal propaganda, commissioning a series of short films that would demonstrate the glory of the crown and the unparalleled wisdom of his rule. These were predictably flattering and lacked any historical accuracy, a stark contrast to the historically accurate, yet somehow wildly inaccurate in comparison, portrayal of the 100 Years' War. Reginald, amidst the escalating chaos, found himself both overwhelmed and exhilarated. He realized that distributing a technologically advanced device to a medieval population was never going to be simple. It was, however, infinitely more entertaining than his previous job involving copious amounts of medieval mystery meat. As he surveyed the ongoing mayhem, messengers chasing errant geese, villagers arguing over the remote, and knights staging their own versions of historically inaccurate battles, he couldn't help but smile. The revolution was not just ongoing, it was a glorious, chaotic, turnip-flavored mess, and he wouldn't trade it for the world, or even a lifetime supply of perfectly roasted pheasant. The scent of medieval mystery meat, however, still lingered faintly in his mind, a comforting aroma amid the unfolding chaos. The success of Courtflix, it seemed, depended not on the perfection of distribution, but on the ability of the kingdom to adapt to this newly discovered form of entertainment. And to Agnes, who was currently planning a rather large-scale protest against the plague documentaries, Reginald had a feeling that the revolution was far from over. The initial euphoria surrounding Courtflix began to wane as the novelty wore off. The impact, far from being a simple shift in entertainment preferences, rippled through the very fabric of medieval society, causing unforeseen disruptions and sparking unexpected social upheavals. Jousting tournaments, once the pinnacle of aristocratic entertainment, suffered a dramatic decline in attendance. Knights, once vying for glory and the favor of fair maidens, found themselves glued to their scrolls, engrossed in dramatic reenactments of battles they'd already fought, but with far superior special effects and a surprisingly gripping narrative arc. Sir Reginald Strongforth, a knight famed for his prowess in the lists, was now more likely to be found sprawled on the floor of his castle, muttering about the cliffhanger ending to the siege of Chateau Blanc, than practicing his lance work. Minstrels, those itinerant entertainers who for centuries had brought joy and occasional questionable ballads to the kingdom's inhabitants, found themselves facing a crisis of epic proportions. Their traditional songs and stories, once eagerly anticipated, were now met with indifference. Why listen to a rambling minstrel recount the tale of King Arthur when one could watch a meticulously crafted, digitally enhanced version on Courtflix? Their livelihoods threatened, many minstrels attempted to adapt, incorporating snippets of popular Courtflix shows into their performances. One particularly ambitious minstrel even attempted a live-action reenactment of a particularly dramatic sword fight from Knights of the Round Table, ending with him accidentally setting his lute on fire. The attempt, though spectacular, did little to improve his standing in the court or his ability to secure future employment. Many others simply gave up, their lutes gathering dust, their voices silenced by the silent allure of the royal scroll. Public hangings, once a popular form of community entertainment, were all but forgotten. Who needed to witness a grisly execution when one could binge-watch a multi-season saga about the rise and fall of a wicked sorcerer, complete with intricate plots, morally ambiguous characters, and dazzling digital effects far surpassing anything the most skilled executioner could manage? The hangman, once a respected, if somewhat morbidly employed, member of society, found himself facing unemployment, his skills suddenly rendered obsolete. He attempted to rebrand himself as a Courtflix stunt double, offering his expertise in convincingly portraying death scenes, a proposition that was politely declined by the Courtflix production team. The displacement of traditional forms of entertainment brought about broader social changes. Taverns, once bustling centers of community life, saw their patronage decline. Why gather around a smoky hearth and listen to drunken tales when one could share comments and memes about Courtflix shows with fellow viewers on a new platform known as medieval Reddit? Even the church felt the impact, as sermons were overshadowed by the captivating narratives unfolding on the royal scroll. One particularly enterprising priest attempted to incorporate Courtflix clips into his sermons, illustrating biblical parables with scenes from David and Goliath, the untold story, a move that was considered mildly heretical by some and amusingly unorthodox by others. The economic impact was equally profound. The demand for oak casings for Courtflix scrolls boosted the timber industry, making Reginald a wealthy man and sending the price of oak soaring. However, the decline in the minstrel trade, the public hanging industry, and even the demand for ale in taverns resulted in widespread economic hardship. A new class of unemployed performers and artisans emerged, forced to adapt to a world where entertainment was no longer a live, local experience, but a digital, on-demand phenomenon. The social consequences were, however, far more complex. The once rigid social hierarchy of the kingdom began to soften as knights, peasants, and even members of the clergy found themselves united by their shared fascination with the same Courtflix shows. The shared viewing experience fostered a sense of community, creating an unlikely bond between individuals who might otherwise have lived entirely separate lives. Discussions of the latest episodes, analyses of the plot twists, and heated debates over the historical accuracy, or rather inaccuracy, of the historical dramas became a common form of social interaction, replacing, to some extent, the traditional forms of social gatherings and conversations. But this new sense of unity was not without its conflicts. The popularity of certain shows led to unexpected rivalries and conflicts, sometimes mirroring the conflicts depicted on the very shows themselves. A particularly intense rivalry erupted between the villages of Oakhaven and Willowbrook following a heated debate on the merits of the show The Dragon's Curse, Part 3. The feud, which involved mudslinging and the unfortunate impaling of a particularly expensive scarecrow ended with the intervention of the royal sheriff and a promise from both villages to never watch that particular episode again. The unexpected consequences of Courtflix were as varied and unpredictable as the shows themselves. While it brought about a new era of entertainment and a temporary boost to certain industries, it also created widespread social and economic upheaval. The kingdom, once ordered and predictable, was now a chaotic landscape of competing desires, unexpected alliances, and mud-caked village feuds, all fueled by the irresistible allure of a medieval streaming service. It was, in Reginald's estimation, a glorious, chaotic, and slightly terrifying mess, a testament to the enduring human need for entertainment and the unpredictability of societal changes. And of course, a continuing reminder that even in the most technologically advanced, for its time of kingdoms, certain issues, like excessively territorial geese and the misinterpretation of historically inaccurate documentaries, never truly go away. He privately hoped Agnes, who was currently planning a village-wide boycott of plague news in favor of a strictly turnip-focused streaming channel, didn't succeed, but he doubted she would fail. Agnes, he had learned, was a force of nature. The air in the crooked tankard hung thick with the smell of stale ale and simmering resentment. Dim light flickered from sputtering candles, casting long, dancing shadows on the faces gathered around a scarred oak table. These weren't your typical tavern brawlers. These were the remnants of a dying era, disgruntled minstrels, their lutes gathering dust in corners, and a surprisingly cheerful hangman, his noose gathering cobwebs instead of necks. They were the unlikely vanguard of a new form of rebellion, a resistance movement born not of political ideology, but of the existential threat posed by Courtflix. Bartholomew, a minstrel whose voice once commanded the attention of kings, now mostly commanded the attention of a particularly aggressive tavern cat, cleared his throat. Friends, colleagues, fellow victims of technological tyranny, he began, his voice a raspy whisper compared to its former booming resonance. We stand at a crossroads. Our traditions, our skills, our very livelihoods, they're all threatened by that infernal royal scroll. A murmur of agreement rippled through the group. A former jester, now sporting a surprisingly well-maintained beard, a consequence of having more time on his hands, chuckled. I remember the good old days, when a well-placed pratfall could guarantee a hearty laugh and a full purse. Now, they just watch some fancy-pants knight fall off his horse on Courtflix, and it's better somehow. The hangman, surprisingly upbeat despite his unemployment, tapped a thick finger on the table. I tried to branch out, he offered cheerfully, proposed my services as a stuntman. Apparently, Courtflix prefers digitally generated death throes. Can you believe the indignity? Bartholomew tapped a worn scroll, a genuine handwritten one, not a Courtflix-produced electronic wonder. Our answer, he declared, lies not in competition, but in subversion. We must fight fire with, not fire, that's messy. Let's say we fight digital fire with analog intrigue. The group leaned forward, intrigued. Bartholomew unfolded his plan. It was less a military strategy and more a brilliantly absurd campaign of guerrilla entertainment. First, he announced, We unleash the power of the whisper campaign. Rumors, my friends, carefully crafted and strategically planted. We shall fill the kingdom with tales so outlandish, so captivating, they'll overshadow even the most dazzling special effects on Courtflix. The jester raised a hand, like, "The rumor that the king is secretly a badger?" Bartholomew chuckled. "Perhaps, or that Lady Beatrice's prized poodle is a shape-shifting sorcerer. Anything that's juicy enough to distract from the digital delights." "But whispers alone won't do the trick," added a wizened old woman, a former fortune teller whose crystal ball had recently been replaced by a somewhat dusty Courtflix scroll. "We need something tangible." "Ah, yes," Bartholomew said, a sly smile playing on his lips. "Our weapon will be bad poetry." The hangman looked confused. "Bad poetry?" Bartholomew nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, but not just any bad poetry. We'll write ballads so ludicrously awful, so utterly cringe-inducing, they'll drive viewers away from Courtflix. We'll fill the kingdom with rhymes so truly terrible, people will gladly pay good money to avoid them. Imagine it, a kingdom-wide aversion to bad poetry. That's the power we wield." The old woman smiled. "And who will deliver these poetic weapons?" "The children," Bartholomew announced, his eyes gleaming with mischief. "We'll train them. We'll arm them with our terrible verses. They'll infiltrate castles, taverns, even Courtflix viewing parties. They'll recite our atrocious rhymes with the innocence and enthusiasm only children can muster. It will be unstoppable." The group erupted in laughter, the sound bouncing off the tavern walls. The plan, though unorthodox, held a certain perverse charm. It was a rebellion fought not with swords and shields, but with bad rhymes and strategically placed rumors. Their strategy wasn't limited to bad poetry, though. They developed other ingenious tactics. The dissemination of intentionally misleading, behind-the-scenes information about Courtflix productions, rumors of on-set romances, disastrous takes, and disastrous wardrobe malfunctions. They released counterfeit scrolls filled with unintentionally hilarious retellings of Courtflix's most popular shows, resulting in a surge of alternate universe fan fiction that delighted the populace. Their most daring campaign, however, involved the repurposing of the old punishment stocks. Rather than a tool for shaming, they transformed the stocks into elaborate viewing platforms, complete with uncomfortable seating, strategically placed goose droppings, and a loud, continuously looping recording of Bartholomew's most agonizingly bad ballads. This ensured that anyone caught attempting to watch Courtflix in public faced a far more unpleasant experience than simply missing the latest episode. The campaign became instantly notorious. The impact of their rebellion was subtle, but undeniable. Courtflix viewership dropped significantly, not because people actively rejected the platform, but because the kingdom was simply too distracted by other forms of entertainment. Hilariously terrible poems, outrageous rumors, and the sheer spectacle of watching hapless citizens endure the stocks. Even the royal family found themselves drawn into the mayhem, their evening Courtflix marathons frequently interrupted by urgent reports about the latest outrageous rumor or poetic catastrophe. The kingdom, once unified under the banner of Courtflix, became fractured and unpredictable, a chaotic mess of competing narratives and bizarre entertainment. The disgruntled minstrels and the unemployed executioner, despite their initial despair, had inadvertently crafted a new form of societal entertainment, one that celebrated the absurd, the unpredictable, and the utterly ridiculous. The Courtflix scroll, for the moment, was no longer the undisputed ruler of leisure time. They had, through sheer inspired absurdity, won a small, chaotic, and thoroughly satisfying victory. And somewhere, amidst the cacophony, Bartholomew was penning his next masterpiece, a ballad about a badger king who ruled a kingdom of sentient turnips. The kingdom braced itself. Chapter 3. The glitch. The sudden silence was deafening. One moment, the great hall of the castle echoed with the rhythmic clicks and whirs of countless royal scrolls, the flickering light of their screens illuminating the faces of nobles engrossed in the latest episode of Knights Who Say Ni, a surprisingly violent and historically inaccurate dramatization of Arthurian legend. The next, a collective gasp rippled through the room. Darkness, utter, complete, and technologically induced darkness. The royal scroll, the kingdom's beloved, and some would say only, source of entertainment, had malfunctioned. A catastrophic system-wide glitch, the likes of which had never been seen, had plunged the entire kingdom into an unexpected and unprecedented state of entertainment deprivation. King Theodore, mid-bite of a particularly extravagant gooseberry tart, stared blankly at the now dead screen of his royal scroll. His expression shifted from regal displeasure to something akin to panicked bewilderment. His normally impeccably groomed beard twitched in agitation. "By the beard of Merlin," he exclaimed, his voice a mixture of outrage and desperation. "The scroll, it's dead." The court erupted into a pandemonium of frustrated sighs, panicked shouts, and the surprisingly loud clatter of dropped goblets. The queen, normally a picture of serene composure, was currently attempting to revive her scroll with a series of increasingly frantic slaps and muttered incantations. The royal jester, usually a master of improvisation, stood frozen, his usual repertoire of witty quips replaced by a disconcerting blank stare. Even the royal corgis, accustomed to the hypnotic glow of the royal scroll, whimpered disconsolately at the sudden absence of their favorite program. Corgi Chronicles, a reality show that documented the lives of the royal canine family. Viewers had been particularly captivated by the ongoing rivalry between Princess Fluffybutt III and Sir Barksalot. Their sudden disappearance from the screens had sparked a wave of national anxiety. The news spread through the kingdom like wildfire, carried by frantic messengers on horseback. In the bustling marketplace, normally a hive of activity buzzing with the sounds of bartering and haggling, a strange and unsettling silence descended. Merchants, usually masters of persuasion, found themselves at a loss for words. Their customers, accustomed to the escapism of Courtflix, were too preoccupied with their own entertainment withdrawal to haggle over prices. The usual cheerful clamor was replaced by a shared atmosphere of bewilderment and disquiet. Even the town crier, a man whose voice could normally command the attention of even the most stubborn mule, was reduced to a mumbled lament about the absence of the royal scroll. In the village tavern, The usual boisterous revelry was replaced by an almost eerie quiet. The regulars, normally engaged in spirited debates about the merits of different ales or the latest gossip, were listlessly staring into their empty tankards. The barmaid, usually a font of cheerful gossip and quick wit, stood behind the counter, a look of bewildered distress on her face. The most alarming aspect of this disruption, however, was the way the lack of Courtflix seemed to disrupt even the most mundane aspects of life. For instance, the village blacksmith, normally a champion of strong ale and louder boasts, was found weeping softly over his anvil, lamenting the disappearance of his favorite show, Master Blacksmithing, a reality TV show dedicated to the art of the forge. It is worth noting that many viewers felt personally insulted when the host judged his work to be subpar. The sudden cessation of entertainment sparked a desperate attempt to revert to traditional forms of amusement. Traveling minstrels, once relegated to the fringes of society by the rise of Courtflix, suddenly found themselves in high demand. Their performances, once met with polite indifference, were now greeted with an almost desperate enthusiasm. Even their most questionable ballads and jokes were met with hearty laughter, a testament to the collective yearning for entertainment. However, the traditional methods were ill-equipped to match the sheer volume of demand. Jousting tournaments, once exciting spectacles, quickly devolved into chaotic brawls due to the impatience of the audience. Public hangings, typically a popular form of entertainment, drew smaller crowds than usual. People seemed far more invested in the heated debate over who would win the next round in the impromptu chess tournament organized by the local librarian. The situation quickly became more desperate. The lack of Courtflix resulted in a strange wave of nostalgia. People began dusting off forgotten board games and rediscovering the lost art of storytelling. But these attempts to recapture the past were often hampered by the sheer number of people engaging in them. The local library was overrun by people scrambling to read something, while the quiet, organized chess matches degenerated into frenzied shouting matches over who was cheating. The chaos reached its peak at the royal court, where a full-blown entertainment crisis unfolded. The king, desperate for distraction, attempted to revive the ancient tradition of royal storytelling, only to find that his own storytelling abilities were far from captivating. His tale of a brave knight rescuing a damsel from a dragon was met with a mixture of polite coughs and outright yawns. Even his corgis seemed unimpressed. The queen, meanwhile, resorted to needlepoint, a hobby that proved to be far less engaging than the latest episode of Royal Intrigue, a fictionalized soap opera depicting the lives of the royal family. The kingdom's unexpected descent into a pre-Courtflix era highlighted a disturbing truth. The kingdom, once rich in traditions, had become utterly reliant on its digital entertainment. The sudden absence of the royal scroll not only disrupted their leisure time, but their very social fabric. The collective panic and frantic search for entertainment highlighted the pervasive influence of technology and the human need for distraction. The temporary return to simpler forms of entertainment was a stark reminder of a bygone era, a nostalgic interlude in the kingdom's digitally driven existence. The kingdom held its breath, awaiting the return of their digital overlord, and wondering if anything would ever be quite the same. The silence, however, was soon to be broken. The royal scroll's return was as sudden and disruptive as its departure, bringing with it a whole new set of problems. The news of the royal scroll's demise reached Reginald, a lowly stable hand, known more for his uncanny ability to predict the outcome of horse races than for any particular bravery, while he was attempting to coax a particularly stubborn mule into its stall. He wasn't known for his bravery, or indeed any outstanding qualities, other than an inexplicable knack for predicting the precise moment a horse would stumble. This skill, remarkably, was not useful in this particular situation. Thomas, the village blacksmith, whose expertise extended far beyond fixing horseshoes, including a rather alarming ability to mend broken goblets using only his teeth, was equally surprised by the sudden technological blackout while in the middle of attempting to forge a new horseshoe that looked suspiciously like a miniature dragon. Their initial responses were predictable. Reginald, initially paralyzed by the lack of Corgi Chronicles, found himself unexpectedly gripped by the gravity of the situation. The prospect of a kingdom without its daily dose of adorable canine antics was, he realized with horror, a genuinely terrifying one. Thomas, after a moment of profound grief over the lost episode of master blacksmithing, in which he felt he had been unfairly judged, focused his considerable mental fortitude on the problem. This, he declared, brandishing a still-glowing horseshoe, is not merely an entertainment crisis, it is a crisis of national proportions. Surprisingly, it was their unlikely skills, Reginald's uncanny ability to predict the future of horses, and Thomas's inexplicable metalworking abilities, that made them the unlikely saviors of the kingdom. A cryptic message, delivered by a breathless messenger pigeon, a surprisingly advanced method of communication in this age of Courtflix, one must admit, hinted at a possible solution hidden within the Whispering Mountains, where an ancient hermit known as Brother Bartholomew, a man who claimed to possess the mystical ability to communicate with technology, resided. Reginald, ever the pragmatist, pointed out that such skills sounded remarkably like knowing a lot about machines. Thomas, however, was more intrigued. "Sounds like a jolly good adventure," he declared, grabbing his hammer and a bag of assorted nuts and bolts, and probably a good place to find some decent ore. Their journey was, to put it mildly, eventful. They navigated treacherous mountain passes, narrowly avoided being eaten by a particularly grumpy griffin, who apparently had a subscription to Griffin's Got Talent and was disappointed by the lack of new episodes, and outsmarted a band of surprisingly intelligent goblins who, it turned out, were avid fans of Goblin Games, a reality show focused on competitive mud wrestling. The goblins, it turned out, were not impressed by Reginald's lack of mud wrestling skills. Thomas, however, showed an unexpected aptitude for it, thus earning them safe passage. The terrain itself presented a series of comedic obstacles. One particularly memorable incident involved a precarious crossing of a rickety rope bridge, during which Reginald's constant chattering about the potential for the bridge's failure caused Thomas to lose his concentration, almost resulting in them both plummeting into a ravine filled with surprisingly philosophical badgers. Reginald had even predicted the exact moment the bridge would begin to fray. Their encounters with eccentric characters along the way added to the absurdity of their quest. They met a talking squirrel who, surprisingly, was a keen critic of the Royal Scroll's programming, complaining about its lack of representation for squirrels in the medieval drama genre. They also ran into a group of wandering minstrels who, having lost their audience to Courtflix, had turned to highway robbery in a desperate attempt to maintain their lifestyle. Reginald, predictably, managed to predict the time and place of the robbery before it happened, providing an opportunity for a comedic showdown with the disgruntled troubadours. Brother Bartholomew, when they finally reached him, turned out to be less a mystic and more a surprisingly knowledgeable engineer. His mystical communication with technology involved a complex system of levers, pulleys, and an alarming number of spare parts gleaned from various broken royal scrolls. He explained that the glitch was not a simple technical malfunction, but rather a catastrophic software failure triggered by a rogue line of code, likely introduced by a disgruntled programmer who worked for the Royal Scrolls' secret, it turns out, rival streaming service. The solution, however, was surprisingly simple: a specific sequence of commands which needed to be executed by someone skilled in programming. Reginald, it turns out, was strangely proficient with the Royal Scrolls manual, demonstrating skills picked up over years of studying and memorizing the instructions while bored in the stables. He carefully executed the commands, his fingers flying over the scroll's ancient, slightly sticky keyboard. The suspense was palpable. The kingdom held its breath, its collective attention focused on the flickering screen, the fate of its entertainment hanging in the balance. Finally, a flicker, then a spark, then a glorious burst of light. The Royal Scroll was back online, its screens ablaze with the familiar glow of endless entertainment. The joy was immense. A collective sigh of relief swept across the kingdom, causing even the royal corgis to perform an impromptu, slightly off-key rendition of a medieval canine ballad. Reginald and Thomas, once lowly stable hand and blacksmith, were hailed as national heroes. Their heroic quest, far from being a tale of valor and weaponry, was an oddly comical adventure through a landscape of eccentric characters and comedic mishaps. The fact that they fixed a software glitch in a medieval setting is, of course, a feat of extraordinary absurdity that highlights the unexpected intersection of ancient tradition and modern technology. Their story was immortalized in many Courtflix specials, though the accuracy of their portrayal remained questionable, and the kingdom, once again plunged into the comforting embrace of endless entertainment, promptly forgot about its near escape from a pre-Courtflix existence. The adventure had ended. The entertainment, however, was far from over. The celebratory mood, however, was short-lived. A chill wind, carrying the scent of damp earth and something vaguely resembling burnt parchment, swept through the kingdom, extinguishing the festive bonfires and replacing the joyous clamor with an unsettling silence. This silence wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that precedes a particularly awkward encounter with a badger possessed by the spirit of a disgruntled lute player, or, as it turned out, the return of the hooded figure. He materialized from the shadows of the royal oak, a figure cloaked in darkness, his face obscured by a deep hood that seemed to swallow the remaining twilight. He carried no weapon, only a single, withered rose, its thorns longer and sharper than any sword. The rose itself seemed to pulse with an unnatural light. The very air around him crackled with an unsettling energy, a blend of static electricity and the faint aroma of ozone and old books. Reginald, ever the pragmatist, immediately began calculating the odds of the rose spontaneously combusting. Thomas, however, simply stared, his mouth agape. Even the royal corgis seemed unnerved, their usually boisterous barking replaced by a series of nervous whimpers. The hooded figure spoke, his voice a low, resonant murmur that seemed to echo from the very depths of the earth. The scroll's restoration is but a temporary reprieve, he intoned, his words dripping with a darkly humorous foreboding. A mere patching of a wound that festers deep within its digital core. Reginald, ever the practical one, interrupted. Look, pal, we're just happy to have Corgi Chronicles back. Can you just disappear? The figure ignored him, continuing in his ominously theatrical tone. The glitch, you see, was not a simple error. It was a symptom, a sign of a greater imbalance, a cosmic dissonance between the analog heart of your kingdom and the digital pulse of the scroll. He paused for dramatic effect, allowing the wind to rustle ominously through the leaves. Thomas, ever the blacksmith, found this analogy somewhat confusing, but he held his tongue. He thought of the many times he had hammered iron, his arms aching and his face smeared with soot. He decided he didn't want to ponder such cosmic dissonances just yet, let alone the implications for his ability to forge metal based on his interpretations of such highfalutin concepts. The true solution, the figure continued, his voice dropping to a near whisper, lies not in the mechanics of the scroll, but in the very essence of its being, a hidden code woven into the fabric of its creation, a secret only the most astute observer could discern. He presented the withered rose, its thorns gleaming in the fading light. Within this lies a clue, he whispered, a cryptic message encoded in the petal's arrangement, the thorn's number, and the very essence of the flower's decay. Reginald, who had been meticulously examining the rose with a magnifying glass, he seemed to have conjured from nowhere, a common occurrence, suddenly gasped, by the beard of Odin. The thorns, they form a binary sequence. Thomas, still somewhat bewildered by the entire situation, muttered, Binary what now? Reginald, his eyes wide with excitement, began rapidly translating the thorny binary code into a series of seemingly random symbols. It's an alchemical formula, he exclaimed, his voice barely a whisper. A recipe for a digital elixir, a restorative potion for the scroll's digital soul. The hooded figure smiled, a chilling, unsettling smile that seemed to momentarily illuminate his obscured face. Indeed, he said, his voice regaining its resonant depth, but to create this digital elixir requires ingredients thus not found within the walls of your kingdom, and some tools far more potent than your blacksmithing supplies. He then proceeded to give them a series of clues. Each was more absurd than the last. One clue involved the precise chirping pattern of a particularly rare breed of cricket found only in the swamps south of the kingdom, whose songs held the first part of the formula. Another involved the precise number of scales on a certain type of dragon, preferably a grumpy one, whose hide held a vital ingredient for the elixir. A third clue involved locating a certain type of mushroom that only bloomed during a full moon eclipse, while the royal corgis were singing a particular medieval canine ballad. This last clue was particularly challenging since it required precise timing and involved a frustratingly difficult rendition of the canine ballad, which the royal corgis, much to the chagrin of the seekers, frequently forgot the lyrics to. Reginald, using his uncanny predictive skills, calculated that the optimal moment to collect the mushroom would be when the moon was aligned with the precise location of the most stubborn mule in the royal stables, which coincidentally was the same one he had been trying to coax into its stall at the beginning of the whole Courtflix saga. It was, to say the least, a series of truly bizarre events, made even more surreal by the hooded figure's constant, cryptic pronouncements and seemingly random appearances. Throughout this ordeal, Thomas, ever the optimist, maintained a remarkably jovial attitude, occasionally stopping to sharpen his tools or repair the occasional damage caused by Reginald's near-constant state of panic and the occasionally unpredictable behavior of the grumpy griffin, who, it turned out, was quite a stickler for accurate medieval canine ballads. The griffin, despite his initial disappointment with the Griffin's Got Talent programming, actually became something of an unlikely ally, providing them with rather insightful critiques of the royal corgi's musical talents. The quest for the ingredients was a farcical journey of its own, filled with unexpected obstacles and humorous encounters. They had to navigate a treacherous maze, guarded by sentient scarecrows with a penchant for cryptic riddles, barter with a coven of witches who valued their ingredients far more than gold. They preferred tales of romantic medieval drama with happy endings, and outsmart a pack of werewolves who, surprisingly, were passionate fans of Corgi Chronicles and only agreed to help if they received access to the show's latest episode. Finally, armed with the necessary ingredients and tools, Reginald and Thomas returned to Brother Bartholomew's workshop. The hooded figure reappeared, watching them with an enigmatic expression. The alchemical process was, to put it mildly, chaotic and far more exciting than any show on Courtflix. There were explosions of sparks, bubbling concoctions that changed color with alarming rapidity, and one particularly memorable incident involving Reginald accidentally setting the workbench on fire while trying to measure out the correct amount of dragon scale dust. In the end, however, they succeeded. They created the digital elixir, a shimmering liquid that pulsed with an ethereal light, and poured it into the scroll's damaged core. The results were instantaneous and quite dramatic. The scroll's screen flashed with a dazzling array of colors, displaying a kaleidoscope of images ranging from medieval jousting tournaments to modern-day reality TV shows that appeared to be recorded by a rogue group of goblins. And most importantly, Corgi Chronicles returned better than ever. The hooded figure, having witnessed their success, vanished as quickly as he had appeared, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the lingering question of his identity. Reginald and Thomas, exhausted but triumphant, were once again hailed as heroes, their unlikely quest immortalized in a series of Courtflix documentaries, the accuracy of which remained, as always, questionable. The kingdom, once again blissfully unaware of the potential for a second catastrophic software failure, resumed its binge-watching with renewed vigor. The adventure once again had ended, leaving only a trail of laughter, chaos, and a renewed appreciation for the truly absurd. The entertainment, however, was far from over. The alchemical concoction, a shimmering opalescent liquid that smelled suspiciously of burnt sugar and dragon breath, bubbled ominously in the crucible. Reginald, his usually pristine tunic, now stained with various alchemical residues and what appeared to be a smudge of dragon drool, peered intently at the mixture. His brow was furrowed in concentration, a stark contrast to the usually jovial glint in his eyes. Thomas, ever the pragmatist, or perhaps just used to the unpredictable nature of Reginald's experiments, meticulously polished his hammer, occasionally glancing at the bubbling potion with a mixture of apprehension and quiet amusement. The air crackled with anticipation. The fate of Courtflix, and by extension, the kingdom's access to Corgi Chronicles, hung precariously in the balance. For days they had toiled, following the cryptic clues left by the hooded figure. The journey had been fraught with peril, punctuated by encounters with grumpy griffins, riddle-loving scarecrows, and a surprisingly litigious coven of witches who demanded a full apology for a poorly written romance subplot in the most recent miniseries, The Ballad of Sir Reginald the Righteous, a thinly veiled and highly inaccurate dramatization of his past escapades. But something had shifted within Reginald during their quest. Initially, his focus had been solely on restoring Courtflix. The interruption of his meticulously planned viewing schedule had been, frankly, a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. The thought of another night without the latest episode of Corgi Chronicles was enough to send shivers down his spine. However, the absurd, chaotic nature of their journey, the unexpected camaraderie with Thomas, and the sheer ridiculousness of it all had begun to unravel his tightly wound pragmatism. He found himself considering the hooded figure's cryptic pronouncements about the cosmic dissonance between the kingdom's traditions and the technological marvel of Courtflix. Initially, he dismissed it as the ramblings of a mad sorcerer. Yet, as he stirred the bubbling elixir, a profound realization began to dawn upon him. The quest for the ingredients had not simply been about restoring a broken streaming service. It had been a journey, a pilgrimage even, through the kingdom's heart, exposing him to its vibrant, chaotic tapestry of life. He had interacted with its people, the grumpy griffins, the riddle-loving scarecrows, even the litigious witches, and discovered a depth of character and resilience he hadn't previously appreciated. He remembered the old traveling minstrels, their songs weaving tales of heroes and villains, of love and loss. He recalled the excitement of the jousting tournaments, the thrill of the crowd, the clash of steel, the cheers, the jeers. The public hangings, while less appealing, were certainly memorable. He had observed these things before, but merely as background noise to his primary pursuit of relaxation and entertainment. He had seen the value in them, certainly, but not truly understood their impact. Now, however, he saw them as essential elements of the kingdom's cultural fabric, integral to its very soul. Courtflix, in all its digital glory, was a powerful force, offering unprecedented access to entertainment and information. However, its intrusion threatened to overshadow, even to replace these traditions, which were an equally important aspect of their existence. The balance the hooded figure had spoken of was not merely a technical one, but a cultural one. The digital realm could coexist with the analog one, but only if the two were approached with understanding, not disdain. The realization struck him with the force of a well-aimed trebuchet bolt. The entertainment provided by Courtflix was significant, no doubt, but it was not, and could not be, a replacement for the community that grew from sharing tales, whether from a traveling minstrel or on the latest episode of Corgi Chronicles. He had to accept that they needed both. With this newfound understanding, Reginald adjusted his approach. He no longer saw the bubbling elixir as merely a technical fix. He viewed it as a bridge, a symbolic fusion of the old and the new. It wasn't just about fixing a glitch, it was about restoring a balance. He approached his work with a newfound care, a sense of purpose that transcended the simple restoration of Courtflix. He carefully added the final ingredient, a pinch of powdered unicorn horn, obtained after a surprisingly amicable negotiation with a unicorn who appreciated Reginald's insightful critique of his portrayal in a particularly inaccurate Courtflix drama. The potion glowed, its light intensifying, pulsating with an energy that seemed to echo the kingdom's own vibrant spirit. As they poured the elixir into the scroll's core, the air hummed with anticipation. There was a blinding flash, and then silence. Slowly, the screen flickered to life. Corgi Chronicles was back, indeed, but something had changed. The show still offered its usual heartwarming, and sometimes highly questionable, antics of the royal corgis, but it was now interwoven with segments highlighting the kingdom's traditional forms of entertainment. The minstrels, the jousting tournaments, even the public hangings, though these were now presented with a more sensitive approach. The balance had been restored. The digital and analog worlds coexisted, each enriching the other. Courtflix remained a source of endless entertainment, but it now served as a complement to, not a replacement for, the kingdom's rich cultural heritage. Reginald, looking at Thomas with a newfound respect, realized that perhaps the greatest entertainment of all was the unexpected journey, the shared experiences, the unlikely friendships forged in the quest to fix a simple glitch. He learned that even the most pragmatic of individuals can find unexpected growth and appreciation for the absurd, even when staring at a screen for hours at a time. The hooded figure had vanished without a trace, leaving Reginald to reflect on the true meaning of the word entertainment. It was far more than just a distraction. It was an essential part of life itself. The hooded figure, whose identity remained as shrouded in mystery as a particularly effective cloak, simply pointed a bony finger towards a peculiar contraption resembling a giant, ornate hamster wheel fashioned from polished oak and interwoven with shimmering wires. The chronosynclastic infuser, he rasped, his voice like gravel gargling with vinegar, the key to restoring temporal coherence to the royal scroll. Reginald, his brow furrowed in a manner that suggested he was simultaneously contemplating the mysteries of the universe and the best way to remove a particularly stubborn stain from his tunic, stared at the contraption with a mixture of awe and abject terror. Thomas, ever practical, examined the device with the critical eye of a seasoned blacksmith, assessing a particularly wobbly anvil. It looked suspiciously like something I'd expect to find in a particularly ambitious mouse's nest, Thomas observed, tapping the oak frame with a practiced finger, though I admit the wiring is rather impressive. Did you pilfer it from a goblin's workshop? he asked, glancing at the hooded figure with a mixture of suspicion and admiration. The hooded figure merely grunted, a sound somewhere between a disgruntled badger and a rusty hinge. He then proceeded to explain the process with the clarity of a particularly dense fog. It involved spinning the hamster wheel, or more accurately, the chronosynclastic infuser, at precisely 7,183 revolutions per minute, while simultaneously chanting a forgotten incantation in Old Norse and juggling 3 enchanted turnips. Failure to adhere precisely to these instructions, the hooded figure warned, could result in anything from a minor temporal anomaly, such as finding oneself inexplicably transported to the reign of King Sanut, to the complete annihilation of the kingdom, a decidedly less appealing prospect. Reginald, despite his initial reservations, approached the task with the single-minded focus of a man whose access to Corgi Chronicles was on the line. He'd wrestled dragons, outsmarted cunning sorcerers, and endured the soul-crushing tedium of a royal court ball, all for the sake of maintaining his viewing schedule. A bit of Old Norse chanting and turnip juggling, he figured, would be mere child's play in comparison. Thomas, however, remained skeptical. "Are you certain these turnips are truly enchanted?" he queried, holding one up to the light. "They look suspiciously like the ones I bought from old Maggie last week." I distinctly remember her complaining about the unusually high concentration of grubs. The hooded figure, momentarily distracted by the appearance of a particularly plump earthworm, did not answer. The ensuing spectacle was, to put it mildly, chaotic. Reginald, with the grace of a drunken ox, attempted to spin the chronosynclastic infuser while simultaneously chanting the Old Norse incantation, his voice cracking at various intervals. The enchanted turnips, despite being allegedly magical, proved rather resistant to juggling. One went astray, bouncing harmlessly off the head of the hooded figure, who seemed oddly unfazed by the incident. Thomas, meanwhile, meticulously documented the entire process, providing running commentary that was more suited to a wrestling match than an alchemical experiment. Sweat beaded on Reginald's brow as he struggled to maintain the necessary RPM. The air crackled with static electricity and the faint scent of burnt turnips. Just as Reginald felt himself succumbing to the sheer absurdity of the situation, the chronosynclastic infuser gave a loud whirring sound, then spun with a speed that defied the laws of physics, or at least Reginald's understanding of them. Simultaneously, Reginald's chanting reached a crescendo that could have shattered glass, if there had been any glass in the immediate vicinity, and the 3 turnips magically arranged themselves in a perfect, symmetrical triangle before him. A blinding flash of light filled the room, accompanied by a deafening crack that echoed through the castle. When the light subsided, a palpable silence descended. Reginald, breathless but triumphant, gazed at the royal scroll. The screen flickered, then blazed to life, displaying the familiar logo of Courtflix. Corgi Chronicles was back, but something was different. The episode began not with the usual antics of the royal corgis, but with a rather earnest introduction detailing the intricate craftsmanship that went into building the royal scroll. This included interviews with the many artisans who had dedicated time and energy towards its creation. The contrast between the high-tech interior and the rustic exterior was noted with amusement. Further episodes featured segments showcasing the kingdom's traditional forms of entertainment. The traveling minstrels were now rock stars, their songs remixed with electric instruments. Jousting tournaments were presented as elaborate sporting events with instant replays, slow motion analysis, and expert commentary, although there was some disagreement about the proper application of the offside rule in medieval jousting. The public hangings, now sanitized and presented as a historical reenactment, were given sensitive context and explanations of the practices. The hooded figure, having apparently completed his mission, vanished as suddenly as he had arrived, leaving behind only the lingering scent of burnt turnips and a profound sense of bewilderment. Reginald, staring at the screen, realized that the technical fix had somehow also mended a rift in the kingdom's cultural identity. Courtflix, instead of replacing traditional forms of entertainment, had become a vehicle for celebrating them. The blending of the old and the new was oddly harmonious. The corgis' antics now played alongside beautifully shot scenes of traditional craftspeople, and the latest episode of the Knights Who Say Knee sitcom included a delightful subplot featuring a medieval artisan providing detailed instructions on the proper construction of a trebuchet. The show had become a vibrant tapestry interwoven with the kingdom's history and traditions. Reginald found himself deeply touched and amused by the way Courtflix was showcasing the past in a funny and engaging manner. Thomas, ever pragmatic, added the final touch. He presented Reginald with a finely crafted wooden frame to hold the royal scroll, crafted from the same oak that had been part of the chronosynclastic infuser. "A patch for the ages," Thomas remarked, smiling. Reginald, examining the beautifully crafted frame, realized that the journey to fix the glitch had been much more than a simple technical repair. It had been a journey of self-discovery, a revelation of the unforeseen connections between technology and tradition, and a reminder that even the most absurd quests can lead to unexpected understanding and appreciation of one's cultural heritage. He could now fully appreciate the true value of entertainment, a blend of ancient traditions and modern marvels, all served in equal measure. As he settled in to watch the next episode of Corgi Chronicles, Reginald reflected that perhaps the greatest entertainment of all was the unexpected journey itself. The hooded figure may have vanished, but the lessons learned and the unexpected friendships forged remained, a testament to the resilience of both technology and the human spirit, and of course, the undeniable charm of corgis. Chapter 4: A New Medieval Order. The blacksmith Barnaby hammered rhythmically on a horseshoe, the clang echoing the rhythmic pulse of the Courtflix logo displayed on a small, hand-painted screen nestled amongst his tools. He'd initially scoffed at the idea of a royal scroll, dismissing it as wizardry gone awry. Now, however, he found himself regularly pausing his work to catch the latest episode of Medieval MasterChef, a surprisingly captivating show featuring culinary competitions amongst the kingdom's most skilled and occasionally most incompetent cooks. The judges, a stern-faced nun and a surprisingly flamboyant jester, provided hilarious commentary, often resulting in Barnaby chuckling so heartily that sparks flew from his forge. Across the village, Ilara, a weaver renowned for her intricate tapestries, used Courtflix to supplement her already impressive repertoire. She discovered a series of tutorials on advanced weaving techniques, presented with the help of charming animated spiders who narrated the process with surprising sophistication. These tutorials were interspersed with snippets of historical dramas, offering a fascinating glimpse into the lives of her ancestors and showcasing their intricate weaving patterns. She now found herself weaving images inspired by her favorite episodes, transforming her tapestries into intricate narratives that blended history and entertainment. Even the most skeptical members of the court gradually came around. Sir Reginald, once a staunch defender of traditional entertainment, now found himself organizing Courtflix viewing parties. These events featured both the latest episodes of Corgi Chronicles, still a phenomenal success, though now featuring informative segments on canine history and etiquette, and live performances by the traveling minstrels, whose music was now skillfully blended with Courtflix-inspired digital enhancements. The royal family themselves were not immune to the charm of Courtflix. Princess Aurelia, initially hesitant about the new technology, discovered a deep love for historical documentaries, which she supplemented with visits to historical locations across the kingdom. She now saw Courtflix not as a replacement for traditional culture, but as a powerful tool for preserving and sharing it with a wider audience. The king, initially concerned about the potential for Courtflix to distract from his royal duties, found himself using it to stay abreast of the latest trends in governance and diplomacy. He'd become particularly fond of the Great Estates Debate, a talk show that hilariously tackled the complexities of medieval land ownership with the wit of a seasoned comedian and the sharp insights of a qualified historian. The integration of Courtflix into the kingdom was not without its challenges. There were the inevitable technical glitches, occasional episodes of static that resembled a particularly malevolent sprite, or sudden freezes that left viewers staring at a rather unflattering image of King Theodore's nose. But these were minor inconveniences compared to the overall positive impact. The village elder, known for his grumpy disposition and fondness for complaining, even admitted to enjoying the daily weather report from Plague News, a cleverly produced update that was both informative and surprisingly hilarious. One of the most significant changes was in the realm of education. Courtflix became an invaluable tool in schools across the kingdom. Children who once struggled with rote learning found themselves captivated by engaging historical dramas and interactive lessons on mathematics and science that incorporated the most advanced special effects in the realm. Instead of memorizing dry facts, students experienced history through vividly rendered battle scenes and relatable character arcs. Even the most complex subjects, such as astrophysics and advanced alchemy, were made fun and accessible through entertaining Courtflix programs. The integration of Courtflix extended beyond the realm of entertainment and education, penetrating even the realm of religious observance. The monks of the nearby monastery, initially resistant to the new technology, found themselves creating a series of instructional videos on medieval monastic life, demonstrating their intricate craftsmanship techniques and providing insights into their daily routines. These videos, surprisingly popular among both religious and secular viewers, offered a fascinating glimpse into the spiritual life of the medieval monastic orders, dispelling myths and showcasing the rich culture of their daily lives. Even the notoriously grumpy court jester, Joffrey, found a way to incorporate Courtflix into his daily routine. He started producing his own series of comedic sketches, using Courtflix's editing tools to create sophisticated video essays that cleverly satirized court life and poked fun at the king's sometimes questionable decisions. These sketches, despite causing some occasional friction with the royal court, quickly became a sensation across the kingdom, garnering a huge following among both the peasantry and the nobility. The initial concerns about Courtflix replacing traditional forms of entertainment proved unfounded. Instead, it became a catalyst for cultural exchange and renewal. Traveling minstrels began incorporating digital elements into their performances, creating electrifying shows that blended traditional folk music with modern technology. Jousting tournaments, broadcast live on Courtflix, attracted a vastly larger audience, transforming them into major sporting events with global appeal. Even public hangings, presented of course with sensitive historical context, gained a newfound popularity, becoming educational events that offered a fascinating glimpse into the justice system of the past. The blending of the old and the new, initially met with apprehension, was eventually embraced with surprising enthusiasm. The kingdom had found a new equilibrium, a harmonious balance between the rich tapestry of its traditions and the convenience and entertainment offered by Courtflix. It was a testament to the resilience of human culture and the unexpected synergy between ancient traditions and modern technology. The royal scroll had not replaced the past. It had enhanced it, making it accessible and engaging for a new generation. And of course, there were still plenty of corgis on Courtflix. Reginald wouldn't have it any other way. The impact of Courtflix rippled outwards, touching even the most ancient of traditions. The traveling minstrels, once solely reliant on their voices and instruments, found themselves thrust into a new era. Initially, resistance was fierce. Old Man Fitzwilliam, the leader of the most renowned minstrel troupe, grumbled about the devil's contraptions, threatening to supplant the purity of their art. He envisioned a future where the soulful strum of a lute was replaced by the tinny sounds of a digitized hurdy-gurdy. However, a younger generation of minstrels, led by the fiery Lyra and the inventive Barnaby, no relation to the blacksmith, saw the potential. Lyra, with her soaring voice and a knack for dramatic flair, recognized that Courtflix could expand their reach beyond the limited confines of village squares and castle courtyards. Barnaby, a tinkerer at heart, began experimenting with blending traditional instruments with Courtflix's digital enhancements. He designed custom sound effects that amplified the emotional impact of their ballads, adding swirling digital soundscapes to their performances. Their first Courtflix concert was a gamble. They chose a location steeped in history, the ruins of a crumbling amphitheater, its ancient stones a silent testament to centuries of performances past. They combined their traditional instruments, lutes, harps, and fiddles, with newly created digital sound effects. Lyra's voice, amplified and subtly enhanced, resonated across the space with unprecedented clarity, reaching a virtual audience far beyond the physical confines of the ruins. Barnaby's digital enhancements created a breathtaking soundscape, adding layers of depth and emotion to their music that had never been possible before. The concert was streamed live on Courtflix, attracting viewers from across the kingdom and even beyond into neighboring lands. The success was immediate and overwhelming. The stream garnered thousands of views, many leaving glowing reviews praising the inventive blending of tradition and technology. Fitzwilliam, initially a staunch critic, found himself grudgingly impressed. He witnessed the power of Courtflix to reach a wider audience than they could ever have imagined, and observed how the digital enhancements elevated, rather than detracted from, the emotional power of their music. This success inspired other minstrels. Soon, Courtflix became a platform for showcasing a new wave of medieval musical talent. Village squares, once the sole venues for performances, transformed into outdoor concert arenas equipped with basic sound systems, enhanced by Courtflix's digital capabilities. These venues, a peculiar blend of the ancient and the modern, attracted large crowds, transforming humble gatherings into vibrant celebrations of music and community. The innovative use of technology extended beyond simple amplification. Minstrels began incorporating elaborate visual elements into their performances. Projected images, synchronized with their music, brought their ballads to life. A tale of valiant knights battling a fearsome dragon was enhanced with stunning CGI, created by a surprisingly talented monk who discovered a penchant for digital animation through Courtflix tutorials. A melancholic song about lost love was underscored with images of wistful landscapes, enhancing the emotional impact of the performance. The court itself began commissioning digital enhancements for its own musicians. The royal orchestra, previously confined to traditional arrangements, started experimenting with digitized instruments and special effects, creating truly innovative and memorable performances that were broadcast on Courtflix to great acclaim. King Theodore, initially skeptical about the potential for technology to enhance rather than corrupt tradition, found himself captivated by these new compositions, which he enjoyed while wearing a rather dashing digital crown superimposed onto the screen using Courtflix's augmented reality features. The minstrel's renaissance was not without its challenges. The debate over the authenticity of digitally enhanced performances raged on. Some purists lamented the loss of the pure sound of traditional instruments. Others argued that technology was simply a new tool for storytelling, enriching rather than diluting the art form. The controversy fueled lively discussions across the kingdom, stimulating debate on the interaction between tradition and progress. Courtflix became a battleground for this debate, a platform where both sides voiced their opinions, sparking heated yet often hilarious discussions in the comment sections of online streams. However, the popularity of the digitally enhanced minstrel performances proved undeniable. Traditional minstrels, who initially viewed Courtflix as a threat, were forced to adapt or risk becoming relics of the past. Many embraced the new technology, learning to use it to their advantage. They began creating interactive shows, incorporating elements of audience participation that further engaged their viewers. Some minstrels even started experimenting with streaming live concerts into the homes of the nobility, allowing them to enjoy private performances in the comfort of their castles. This led to a unique blend of personalized entertainment and digital accessibility. The change extended beyond the performers. The audiences themselves were transformed. Courtflix allowed them to appreciate performances far beyond their own local villages, introducing them to a rich diversity of musical styles and talented artists from across the kingdom. A previously isolated community now found itself connected to a wider network, sharing cultural experiences and engaging in lively exchanges. The comment section of Courtflix streams often erupted in discussions about the performances, creating vibrant online communities centered around the appreciation of music. The evolving relationship between technology and tradition wasn't without its amusing glitches. One particularly memorable incident involved a digitally projected dragon during a minstrel performance, accidentally setting the royal tapestry ablaze due to an unforeseen interaction between the projection and a strategically placed candle. The ensuing chaos, captured on Courtflix, became an instant meme, a testament to the unpredictable nature of progress and the endless capacity for things to go hilariously wrong. This incident, however, only served to highlight the humorous and unpredictable aspect of integrating ancient traditions with modern technology. The integration of minstrelsy into the digital realm, initially met with apprehension, ultimately proved a triumph. It demonstrated the resilience of tradition, its adaptability to change, and the capacity of technology to enhance and disseminate cultural heritage. The traveling minstrels, once confined to the dusty roads of the kingdom, found themselves at the forefront of a cultural revolution, a testament to human creativity and the universal allure of music. The combination of traditional minstrelsy and the immersive capabilities of Courtflix created a unique and compelling entertainment experience that transcended boundaries and connected communities in ways that were unimaginable just a few years prior. The ancient art of minstrelsy lived on, but now with the vibrant colors, sounds, and scope of the digital age, a testament to the boundless possibilities of a culture embracing technology's evolution. And somewhere, Old Man Fitzwilliam, despite his initial grumbling, secretly enjoyed the enhanced clarity of Lyra's voice on his newly acquired Courtflix-enabled lute. The impact of Courtflix extended far beyond the realm of minstrelsy, reaching even the highest echelons of power. King Theodore, a man whose days were typically filled with the weighty matters of state, deciding the fate of rebellious barons, mediating disputes between rival monasteries, and meticulously inspecting the royal gooseberry harvest, discovered a new passion. A historical drama series on Courtflix titled rather unimaginatively Kings and Queens, a Royal Saga. Initially, the king had dismissed Courtflix as a frivolous distraction, a waste of time better spent on matters of governance. His advisors, however, recognizing the potential for a royal endorsement to boost the platform's popularity and perhaps secure a few complimentary upgrades for the royal viewing chambers, had gently suggested he give it a try. Theodore, ever the pragmatist, begrudgingly agreed, thinking a quick glance at this Courtflix would suffice. What followed was, to put it mildly, unexpected. The first episode hooked him. The series, a lavish production, replete with questionable historical accuracy, stunning digital battle scenes, complete with slow-motion replays and surprisingly realistic depictions of medieval weaponry, and melodramatic pronouncements unfolded before him. He was immediately captivated by the story of King Alaric the Bold, a supposed ancestor whose reign was marked by both glorious victories and scandalous romances. Theodore, a man known for his stoic demeanor and practical approach to life, found himself unexpectedly drawn into Alaric's tumultuous life. The depiction of Alaric's struggles, the constant political maneuvering, the treacherous court advisors, the weight of the crown, resonated deeply with Theodore. He found himself surprisingly empathetic to the fictional king's plight, recognizing the parallels between Alaric's challenges and his own. The show's portrayal of Alaric's internal struggles, his moments of doubt and vulnerability, humanized the character in a way that Theodore had never considered before. He realized that the burdens of kingship extended beyond simply signing decrees and commanding armies. They encompassed a profound loneliness, a constant awareness of the expectations placed upon him, and a pervasive sense of responsibility for the well-being of his people. Nights spent reviewing state documents were now interspersed with episodes of Kings and Queens, the flickering light of the royal Courtflix screen illuminating his increasingly furrowed brow. He would mutter pronouncements like, "Alaric wouldn't have handled that tax dispute so poorly," or that Baron Elmsworth is far too much like that treacherous Lord Ashford, his criticisms blurring the lines between fiction and reality. His newfound engagement with the series led to some rather unusual occurrences. During a particularly tense session of Parliament, Theodore found himself unexpectedly quoting Alaric the Bold's inspiring speeches, leaving the assembled nobles utterly bewildered. His advisors, initially concerned about the potential implications of the king's newfound hobby, were, however, secretly relieved. The king, once rigidly focused on the mundane aspects of governance, had suddenly gained a new perspective, a more nuanced understanding of the human element within the complexities of leadership. The royal kitchens experienced a surge in demand for Alaric's special brew, a fictional ale mentioned in the series. The royal chefs, baffled by this sudden request for a beverage not found in any of their royal cookbooks, had resorted to recreating it from vague descriptions within the show, resulting in a remarkably potent concoction that fueled many late-night Courtflix viewing sessions. His queen, initially concerned by the king's sudden obsession with this fantastical moving pictures, came to appreciate it as an opportunity for bonding and shared experience. Their late-night discussions, once dominated by weighty matters of court, now frequently involved debating the merits of Alaric's various romantic pursuits, or analyzing the strategic brilliance or incompetence of his military campaigns. Those shared moments of laughter and light-hearted discussion did much to strengthen their bond. Queen Beatrice even started using Courtflix's costume design tutorials to recreate outfits featured in the show, much to the amusement and occasional consternation of the royal dressmakers. The comedic possibilities of the situation weren't lost on the show's creators. Following a particularly intense scene where Alaric is forced to confront a treacherous advisor, the Courtflix commentary section was filled with remarks such as, "That's exactly how Lord Harrington looks when he disagrees with the budget for the royal stables," and King Theodore's expression right now mirrors Alaric's when he discovered his queen was secretly writing romantic poetry to a traveling minstrel. These comments, appearing with surprising rapidity, highlighted the hilarious parallels between the fictional drama and the actual royal court. The king's newfound passion wasn't without its challenges. He began to apply Alaric's sometimes questionable leadership strategies to his own reign, resulting in some unexpected and often comical consequences. For instance, his attempt to implement Alaric's surprise inspection strategy, where he would suddenly visit various parts of the kingdom without prior warning, caused utter pandemonium. The populace, unprepared for the sudden arrival of the monarch, often reacted with a mixture of fear and excitement, leading to incidents involving accidentally set haystacks and a runaway goat that escaped from the royal stables. These events, of course, were promptly documented and disseminated throughout the kingdom, becoming another source of amusement on Courtflix. Yet amidst the chaos and amusement, a subtle but significant transformation was underway. King Theodore, through his immersion in Alaric's fictional world, had begun to explore his own emotions, his insecurities, and his vulnerabilities. He was learning to understand the complexities of leadership, not merely as a matter of power and command, but as a matter of empathy and connection with his people. The historically inaccurate historical drama had surprisingly provided him with a valuable lesson in leadership, empathy, and the surprisingly therapeutic power of escapism. And he'd even learned a few new recipes from the cooking show sponsored by the makers of Alaric's Special Brew, which he now shared with his increasingly amused queen. The impact of Courtflix on the king was profound, reaching beyond the realm of entertainment and touching upon the very core of his reign. It was a testament to the unexpected ways in which technology, even in its most anachronistic application, could shape, transform, and most importantly, humanize even the most powerful of individuals. And as the king continued his binge-watching journey, perhaps the most valuable lesson he'd learned from kings and queens was the importance of a good laugh, even in the face of royal responsibilities. After all, even kings need a break from the weight of the crown. And who knew, maybe his reign, enhanced by the lessons from a digitally enhanced historical drama, would be the stuff of legends themselves, legends perhaps even more dramatic and far more comedic than Alaric's. Reginald's unexpected rise to fame on Courtflix was as bewildering as it was rapid. One moment, he was a lowly stable hand, mucking out stalls and enduring the endless complaints of the royal equerries. The next, he was a viral sensation, his clumsy attempts at medieval TikTok dances garnering millions of views, or at least the equivalent in meticulously hand-drawn animations that circulated via the Royal Messenger Pigeon network. His fame stemmed from an unfortunate incident involving a runaway cartload of cabbages, a startled goose, and a surprisingly graceful dismount from said cart, all caught on camera by a Courtflix-sponsored documentary crew filming a piece on the challenges of transporting produce in the 14th century. The clip, hilariously titled Cabbage Chaos, became an instant classic, catapulting Reginald into the limelight. Initially, Reginald was overwhelmed. He was accustomed to the quiet rhythm of stable life, the smell of hay and horses, the predictable routine of feeding, grooming, and occasionally patching up the occasional scraped knee of a royal steed. Suddenly, He was bombarded with requests for interviews, conducted mostly via quill and parchment, given the limited technological advancements, besieged by fan mail, mostly in the form of slightly chewed bits of bread and scraps of leather, and invited to lavish, though occasionally flea-infested parties thrown by the noble elite. But Reginald, a man of simple tastes and unwavering practicality, remained remarkably grounded. Unlike many who ascended to Courtflix stardom, he didn't succumb to the temptations of excessive indulgence. He refused to trade his humble lodgings for a grand manor, preferring the familiar comfort of his straw-filled mattress. He didn't abandon his duties at the stables, finding solace in the familiar tasks that grounded him. He even continued to participate in his beloved evening hobby of competitive goose herding, a less than glamorous sport that gained a surprising following thanks to Courtflix's coverage. However, Reginald's newfound celebrity did offer him a unique platform. He noticed a chasm between the opulent lifestyles of the aristocracy and the harsh realities faced by the peasantry, a gap reflected in the types of content shown on Courtflix. While the nobles enjoyed lavish documentaries showcasing their hunting trips and jousting tournaments, the lives of the common folk were largely ignored or portrayed in a caricatured manner. This inspired Reginald to use his influence to bridge that gap. He began by producing his own Courtflix content, a series of short, unscripted videos documenting the daily lives of his fellow stable hands, blacksmiths, weavers, and farmers. These raw, unfiltered glimpses into the lives of ordinary people struck a chord with viewers, both among the nobility and the commoners. The aristocrats were fascinated by the simple joys and shared hardships of those who lived outside the castle walls. The peasantry found a sense of solidarity and recognition in seeing their lives depicted with dignity and respect. One particularly poignant video showcased Ilara, a young weaver struggling to support her family. Reginald interviewed her, gently guiding her to share her struggles while highlighting her resilience and determination. Ilara's story resonated deeply with viewers across all social strata. The video ended with Reginald subtly highlighting the disparities in wages and working conditions, sparking a wider conversation about social and economic equality. Reginald's videos went beyond simple documentation. He began to subtly integrate elements of social commentary. He highlighted the importance of fair wages, safe working conditions, and access to basic necessities like food and shelter. He didn't preach or lecture. Instead, he told stories of hard-working individuals, their struggles, and their dreams. This approach proved remarkably effective in garnering support for change. His efforts extended beyond Courtflix. He used his influence to advocate for better treatment of the peasantry and for reform in the legal system, often attending royal court meetings armed with his latest video submissions. Initially, some courtiers were amused, some dismissive, others outright hostile to this stable hand turned social commentator. But Reginald persisted, his gentle manner and persistent advocacy slowly chipping away at the ingrained class barriers. His arguments, delivered with his characteristic good humor and an earnest desire for positive change, proved persuasive. His unique approach to social reform also earned him a surprisingly powerful ally, Queen Beatrice, having developed a fondness for Reginald's simple demeanor and unexpected wisdom. she supported his advocacy efforts, using her considerable influence to push for the implementation of some of the changes that Reginald was pushing for. The Queen's support and Courtflix's reach were a potent combination. Reginald's videos, now promoted by the Queen herself, were seen far and wide, spreading his message of social harmony and reform throughout the kingdom. This resulted in a significant shift in attitudes within the aristocracy, many of whom were touched by the honesty and sincerity of Reginald's approach. He established a community fund through Courtflix, using donations, mostly from wealthy viewers moved by his videos, to assist those in need. The fund supported everything from providing food and shelter for the destitute to financing apprenticeships for children from poor families, and even, much to his own amusement, establishing a training program for aspiring competitive goose herders. The transformation wasn't immediate or effortless. There were setbacks, challenges, and moments of frustration. However, Reginald's persistence, coupled with the power of storytelling and the ever-growing reach of Courtflix, led to significant social changes. The kingdom began to see a noticeable narrowing of the chasm between the nobility and peasantry. Conversations that once would have been deemed unthinkable took place, bridging the gap between different social classes. Reginald never sought fame or fortune. His motivations were purely altruistic, a desire to improve the lives of his fellow countrymen. One cabbage, one goose, and one Courtflix video at a time. And in the annals of medieval history, the name Reginald, the stable hand who became a social reformer, held a special place, a testament to the extraordinary things that even a humble individual could achieve. His story was a far cry from the tales of valiant knights and mighty kings typically depicted on Courtflix. It was a story of kindness, resilience, and the incredible transformative power of a runaway cart full of cabbages. And in the end, that might be the most captivating story of all. His legacy lives on, not just in the hearts of the people he helped, but in the many, many episodes of Reginald's remarkable reforms, a surprisingly popular Courtflix documentary series that became a mainstay of the Royal Scroll. The impact of Courtflix rippled outwards, extending far beyond Reginald's initial sphere of influence. The platform, initially conceived as a frivolous diversion, had inadvertently become a catalyst for social change, prompting a wave of innovation in medieval entertainment and beyond. The once staid world of jousting tournaments, for instance, underwent a dramatic makeover. Courtflix's high definition, by medieval standards of course, think incredibly detailed tapestries projected onto a large canvas, broadcasts brought a level of realism never before achieved. Slow-motion replays of particularly spectacular jousting maneuvers, complete with dramatic medieval-style sound effects, mostly involving strategically placed anvils and strategically timed bellows, became immensely popular. Jousters, once motivated solely by glory and the occasional prize ox, now found themselves competing for Courtflix sponsorships and lucrative endorsement deals, with artisans crafting custom-made lances and chainmail. The rise of Courtflix stars extended beyond the realm of knights and stable hands. Minstrels, once relegated to dimly lit taverns and sparsely attended village fairs, discovered a vast new audience. The platform facilitated the emergence of minstrel vlogs, offering intimate glimpses into their lives their musical inspirations, and their painstaking lute string maintenance routines. These vlogs often involved surprisingly sophisticated, for the time, editing techniques, utilizing a complex system of meticulously placed shadows and cleverly angled candles to create dramatic lighting effects. The most unexpected development, however, was the rise of interactive entertainment. Courtflix began experimenting with choose-your-own-adventure narratives, using a complex system of coded scrolls and specially trained pigeons to deliver personalized story endings based on viewer choices. These interactive dramas, often featuring surprisingly intricate plots involving court intrigue, dragon slaying, with surprisingly convincing puppetry, and the occasional ill-fated attempt at alchemy, became immensely popular, captivating audiences across social strata. Even the once grimly predictable public hangings underwent a subtle transformation. Courtflix's coverage, while still respectful of the solemnity of the occasion, managed to inject a certain degree of unexpected levity. The commentators, a pair of remarkably deadpan monks known as Brothers Bartholomew and Benedict, provided insightful analyses of the condemned's final statements, often highlighting the surprisingly witty or poetic aspects of their farewell addresses. Their commentary, interspersed with historical anecdotes about past executions and meticulously researched details about the construction of the gallows, transformed the event from a purely grim spectacle into a strangely educational and slightly morbid form of entertainment. The rise of Courtflix also spurred innovation in technology. The demand for high-quality visual entertainment fueled advancements in both illumination and projection technology. The development of more efficient oil lamps, combined with advanced lens systems made from meticulously polished gemstones, resulted in brighter and clearer projections. The royal pigeon post, long the backbone of the kingdom's communication system, underwent a significant upgrade, adopting a more efficient and faster delivery system thanks to the strategic breeding program initiated by none other than Reginald himself, his goose herding experience proving surprisingly transferable to pigeon management. The impact extended even beyond entertainment. Courtflix's influence fostered a surge in literacy. The platform's interactive narratives, requiring viewers to decipher coded scrolls and make choices based on written text, inadvertently promoted literacy among the populace. The increasing demand for skilled scribes resulted in the establishment of numerous scriptoriums, offering training and employment opportunities for aspiring scribes and fueling a literary renaissance within the kingdom. Furthermore, Courtflix's reach transcended geographical limitations. The kingdom's vast network of messenger pigeons, significantly expanded thanks to Courtflix's investment, allowed even the most remote villages to access the platform's content, bridging the communication gap between the urban centers and the rural hinterlands. This interconnectedness fostered a sense of national unity and a shared cultural experience across the entire kingdom. However, this technological advancement wasn't without its challenges. The rapid growth of Courtflix led to a dramatic increase in the demand for parchment, causing a significant price surge that briefly threatened to destabilize the kingdom's economy. Furthermore, the rise of Courtflix influencers, individuals who gained notoriety and influence through their online presence, occasionally led to unexpected social disruptions. The occasional celebrity feud, often involving extravagant public displays of medieval insults, which were surprisingly quite inventive, caused a temporary dip in the platform's user engagement. But the overall effect was overwhelmingly positive. Courtflix had not only revolutionized medieval entertainment, but also fostered a new era of technological innovation, social progress, and unexpected cultural exchange. The platform, initially conceived as a simple streaming service, had become a powerful instrument of social change, bridging class divides, promoting literacy, and uniting a kingdom through the shared experience of cabbage chaos, Brother Bartholomew's executions, and the surprisingly dramatic tales of interactive pigeon-delivered dramas. The future of medieval entertainment, as shaped by Courtflix, appeared bright and surprisingly unpredictable. It was a future where the traditions of the past were seamlessly interwoven with the innovations of the new, creating a vibrant tapestry of entertainment, unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen. The once staid and predictable world of medieval entertainment had been transformed, not just by technology, but also by the simple desire for connection, understanding, and a good laugh, even amidst the complexities and contradictions of medieval life. The age of Courtflix, in its unique and hilarious blend of the old and the new, marked not just an evolution, but a revolution in medieval life, proving once again that even a runaway cartload of cabbages could be the catalyst for profound and lasting change. And who knows what further innovations the future might hold, now that the medieval world had discovered the power of on-demand entertainment. The possibilities, like the number of pigeons employed by the royal pigeon post, were seemingly endless.